Good morning, everyone. My name is Gatnasoam Kevin Deer. I'm from the Mohawk Territory of Ganawage. I'm also the Director of Indigenous Knowledge at FNTI. Nice to see everyone here. There's some people on this call that if you go to the website, their picture and their bio is all there. So I'm not gonna end up doing introductions because we have some limited time here. So that being said, I'm going to just start out then with what we do in our longhouse. That whenever we get together for any purpose, we always refer to what we do as the Ohondo Gari Wadeko, the affairs or the business that comes before anything else. So if I could just have your attention for a few minutes as I speak in my own language. Nagadi Tinidu Sawadahun Sadadu Wanizarade Agwegu Watkunuaradu. Yetsanunya di Segu Agwegu Ga Idwes Wanizarade, Sayugo da Karide, Wadaskana Ayuguanu Tunyu. Nono Dasha Torete Ugadinajera di Tuniots. Nagazi, Tinohoda do Wanaduka, Yetinistan Huda. Say you got go Haje, Agwegu Dinohodi, you got to chat the Winizarage. Tinohoda Ganga Gere Hunzage. Nona you going at Tatu, so what the one Nagira, Nona you got Dunkaiga, Sanya Degu, you go in a Gako Sua. Garhagus say to know whether the Dakinoja Gwegunego da do Wini. Teniti guard hire, Ugore Sua Ganunda Sua. Tanunona you got tunde, ne Ozita Ogua. Nene Garanios, the Nizi Kudirano de. Nona da Satu Gauru Enaga, Zenigane Gaeniga Waragi, Yetiso Togora de Veras. Ua, not Garaquinagan, the one Aduka, Suwazia Jokinaka Garakwa, Asutana, Yuki Sota Sutanaka Garakwa. Tenizi de Stokorunio. Tinihadi Yaka de Hunes, Naway the one Aduka, Nana Yuki Soto Gangua. Najinihadi Tadias, no the Wasa de Zinigariusha, what the way at Tiamzade. Nanioni, Noni Uganda, Stoga Yuga de Tano. Tanu, Tinigane Gaeri New Wedage. Tanu Tinu de Yatane, Yeti Zizu, Tinu Tanduru, no the Dowana Duka, Nene, Rarunda de. Tanu Nene Sugoya Dizu. Nega di ono, Wado, Aguego Oscar, the one with Nuni Nagana than that's the Noara, that's in order. In hedge, done in Yori ne Yetiarge, Tinihati de Gunsa Daje. Nene, Roruno, Raudiri Waginioni. When I get the Gatka with the current you want to get, Zenigane Ganwara Dunsara, when I get Wado, under the Wadaswa, no hold the Gari Wahare net one when he's around the Ekadinayokin and one Yura. So as I'm looking around and I see all of you, it's nice that we had the opportunity to open two gifts this morning, which was our eyes. And as we looked around, we said, hey, you know, I'm here again, can go and do all these beautiful things that I want to do with my life. But when we ask ourselves, why is that? We, the Longhouse people, we have our own creation story that talks about how we reside in a giant snapping turtle's back. And then in there, we refer to the earth as our mother, because then all of the things that comes from her body that we need every day, from all those waters to the medicines, to the grasses, to the insects, to the plants, to the corn, the beans, the squash, our life supporters, to those animals, the deer, the moose, the caribou, to the forest, all those trees, to those birds that sing their beautiful songs. When we finish with this lower world, then we look up, we acknowledge the four winds, we acknowledge our grandfather, the thunder beings, we acknowledge the sun, who we refer to as our older brother, we acknowledge our grandmother, the moon, who still determines when we plant, the time of month of women, when we hold our ceremonies and all of that. Then we acknowledge the star stories, the star knowledge, the star people. Then we go into the ancestral realm. We acknowledge all of our ancestors that have come before us. Then we acknowledge sky women. We acknowledge where we originate from, the other side of the sky. So now we take all of that collective things that are here in the sacred circle and web of life, and we offer our attitude of gratitude to all of these things. And we say that we hope that they will continue to sustain us, and that as we're here, we have a responsibility to the future generations too, that when they will be born, they will inherit a happy, safe, clean, peaceful, loving home. So with that, welcome everyone. So before we go a little bit further, just real quickly, I'm just going to talk about relationship. This is the friendship treaty belt that talks about how we originally welcomed each other, and that was a universal sign. You know, you look at Hollywood and you see a chief come up and he does this, but it just says that we're coming here, there's a circle, we're connected to our elder brother son, that we're going to speak our truth because we're coming from the hearth, and because we understand our relationship within the spiritual, our ancestors and the Mother Earth, we speak our truth. Then from there we went now and we talked about relationship, how we would be in relationship with each other. One is canoe, this is the big ship with sails, that we'd be guided by peace, friendship, and respect. So anyway, so here we are. So just before we get started, then just a little bit of housekeeping news. Later, I guess if we have to speak, as you know, you can go to the reaction thing there and you can kind of like raise your hand. I know that as we look to where we are, you know, for some people, I know there's already some of the youth that may be experiencing what they sometimes refer to as climate anxiety. And understandably so, because when we start to understand what's happening with all the things that are going on, for some people, that could be, I guess, a scary thing. But when we're grounded in our own ways of knowing, our own spirituality, we come from love and we're going to return to love. You know, what I tell our people is that we need to be empowered with the idea to be fearless. Don't fear death, don't fear dying, don't fear disease, don't fear sickness. As sure as the sun rises and the sun sets, we're all setting one day. That's a given. None of us are going to live forever. But tomorrow that sun comes up again, and he's referred to as our older brother. So we're all going to resurrect up in the future. So anyway, we take comfort in the knowledge and wisdom of our ancestors of this land. So to begin with, we'll just turn it over now to Professor Guy McPherson to talk about the message that he would like to share with us today when we talk about where we are regarding climate change. Okay, so I'll turn it over to you, Guy.
Thank you, Kevin dear, and thanks to everybody who is participating today. I'm Guy McPherson. I'm Professor Emeritus at the University of Arizona. Emeritus simply means retired with honors. And I've been studying climate change for nearly 40 years, since I was a graduate student many, many years ago. And it's understandable that young people in particular are experiencing climate anxiety, because I've been pretty anxious myself about the direction we're headed. And the direction we're headed is not good. Civilization itself is a heat engine, according to at least 5 peer-reviewed papers by Professor Tim Garrett at the University of Utah. Interestingly, his first paper on the topic was accepted by Stephen Schneider as he lay dying, November of 2009. And the outcry from the academic community was horrific. And collectively, it pointed out that civilization certainly can't be a heat engine, because nobody is more civilized than academic scientists, and we can't be contributing to something bad. The paper was immediately withdrawn and was published only 15 months later in February 2011, only with the understanding that the original paper pointing out that civilization is a heat engine would be accompanied by 2 responses, neither of which responded in a way that questioned the idea of civilization as a heat engine. Professor Garrett has subsequently published 4 additional papers pointing out the details of how and to what extent civilization is a heat engine. Now that's bad enough, but turning off or turning down industrial activity, reducing civilization, in other words, through the loss of aerosol masking, produces an even more rapid, profound increase in global average temperature. For example, Andrew Glickson, famed professor in Australia, pointed out in his October 2020 book, The Event Horizon, that we have already exceeded more than 2 degrees Celsius above the 1750 baseline. So let's take just 2C as the baseline at this point, that let's just assume that we're at 2C, not 1.5, and certainly not 1 above the 1750 baseline. If we eliminate industrial activity, according to the latest paper I've seen, which is by Gia and 3 other colleagues, published in the open access journal Nature Communications on June 15th, 2021, eliminating industrial activity would increase global average temperature by an additional 55% above what it is right now. So if we're at 2C, that takes us to more than 3 degrees C. How quickly? According to James Hansen, the godfather of climate science, in about 5 days. It only takes 5 days for all those aerosols to fall out of the sky and cause rapid heating. So I was pretty anxious about all this. It seems that industrial activity is driving us to extinction rather rapidly, and reducing industrial activity drives us to extinction even faster. And then I came across the great work of Dr. Tao, who is with us here today. And his approach, which I'll obviously let him describe, is, I believe, the only way that will allow us to rapidly cool the planet, beginning with stabilizing planetary temperature where it is right now at a little more than 2 degrees C above the 1750 baseline. If we don't do that, and very quickly, then I suspect we are headed for an ice-free Arctic in the very near term. In fact, James Anderson, the famed Harvard professor, who pointed out the link between chlorofluorocarbons and the ozone hole in the Antarctic region, indicated in January 2018 that we would experience our first ice-free Arctic in 2023, with full impacts being realized in 2024, the following year. Full impacts means release of methane, loss of albedo or reflectance, and many other factors, all of which point to a rapidly overheating of the planet. Jennifer McKibben, about 3.5 years later, who is at the Scripps Institution and also at the University of California, San Diego, in April 2021, had a paper published, and she was quoted on CBS News as indicating that we would experience that first ice-free Arctic a year before Anderson had indicated, but perhaps it would be the year he indicated. So best case scenario, it seems to me, is loss of Arctic ice in 2023, late 2023, with profound impacts to be realized a year later. And all of that sounds like really bad news to me. Then, as I indicated, I discovered the work of Dr. Tao, and I think the man should be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize simply for coming up with the idea. And I certainly am promoting the idea and wishing that we can all come together and support that idea so that we can actually stabilize and then cool the planet. I'll leave it there, and I have plenty of additional information. I presented all of the peer-reviewed papers in my earlier work at guymcpherson.com, and I'll just turn it over to somebody else because I've blathered on long enough. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, then, well, I guess we'll go to Ye Tao.
All right, so I will do a little bit of a presentation. So it's an honor to be invited to speak with fellow speakers, and I will do some recap from what I presented at COP26 about a month ago, but I'll also try to be inspired by traditional thinking and really look at the science and to try to find some connections between ancient wisdom and what we have recently discovered in the past decades using molecular biology. So the crux of the climate challenge problem is one of magnitude, of orders of magnitude. Global warming happens when we have more heat coming in than is going out. So the difference between heat that's generated as sunlight is absorbed into heat at the surface, minus how much is escaping, that difference currently is about 400 terawatts. If we lost aerosol cooling, as Professor McPherson pointed out, we would be looking at a heating imbalance of 1,000 terawatts. And remember, tera means 10 to the 12th, so it's a very gigantic, huge number. In comparison, the entirety of human civilization uses 18 terawatts, and that's even, considering we're using fossil fuels. So in terms of electricity or other clean energy, it's on the order of 1 or 2 terawatts. So therefore, even if we were to consider our fossil fuel power, we have an order 50 times of a mismatch between the problem that we created out there and the technical means that's at the disposal of humanity. So graphically, that's roughly, the comparison of the problem and our technical means. Each of us, we have roughly like 2 kilowatts, and in electricity, it's even less, maybe 400. But if we're just talking about heat, it's 2 kilowatts. But each of us, we are tasked with, the duty to somehow reject the power of an industrial heater out of space. So it's a mystery how we can achieve that. So obviously, we need some sort of a very clever engineering and the leverage in order to overcome this gigantic climate monster. So before we go into a potential solution, I'd like to present some study from a colleague and a mentor. So Andrew Murray is currently the director of the Roland Institute where I work. He's a molecular biologist, and he studies yeast cells, so single cells. So I'd like to highlight his work and explore how these very simple organisms, basically the ancestor of all life forms on Earth, humans, we're also descended from single cells, and how their life story and their behavior in laboratory conditions can inform how humanity should perhaps consider to behave when faced with such a gigantic challenge that is climate change. So there are many reasons why multicellular life form might have evolved. One idea is that when you're multicellular, you become bigger and stronger and better at utilizing resources. So there's also a driving mechanism for for prey to become larger in order to escape predation. So that's one potential mechanism. We're stronger when we work together. There's also some other mechanism that's particular to the particular experimental system used by Professor Murray. So some cells, they're able to metabolize complex nutrients, breaking down complex nutrients using process that happens outside of the cell membrane. When a single cell does that, it's essentially producing a public good that is the simple nutrient, because the simple nutrient, it exists outside of the cell membrane. And within such a liquid environment, what's produced outside can very just easily diffuse and float away. And that won't really provide a benefit to the cell, which did the work of hydrolyzing this complex nutrient into usable, simple, easily digested parts. So a lot of the work is done in an altruistic fashion. So one strategy, for the organism to survive better is to band together to form essentially multicellular complexes, such that they can hand each other these products of their mutual labor and achieve an overall higher concentration of nutrient around them. And of course, each cell also needs some energy, so they need some level of self-care. So Professor Murray and his team asked the question, what happens if you starved these cells, subjecting them in to an environment where a resource is becoming depleted. So remember, the blue enzyme here is a tool used to produce public good. So it's an altruistic protein. And the red tool is what the cell uses to do self-care in order to stay alive itself. So there are many different potential outcomes. One is that the cells, they actually increase their labor and their contribution to make the public good by growing more copies of the altruistic public good producing protein, and also share the resource that they together create. Another alternative is that maybe the cells would become selfish and develop a new mechanism to hoard the very limited resources to use just for themselves. So it's a valid question. When you present a resource depleted environment to such starting single cells, what would they do in order to survive the challenge? So the team conducted an experiment by letting the cells proliferate, then diluting out, maybe having different phenotypes emerging, and repeating the process over 30 times. What they found at the end of the experiment was that the majority of the cultures became multicellular, essentially clumps of different sizes. Sometimes they become really large colonies from an original single cellular organism. And out of the 12 runs or cultures that survived, 11 evolved this type of cooperative behavior. And none of this selfish behavior was observed. Essentially, that means if there are mutations that contribute to this sort of hoarding and isolating individualistic behavior, they eventually perish. So let's come back to climate change. We know that we're confronted with global heating. I'm using some French slides because there's a Canadian audience. And the heat has dramatically negative impact on most of the plants that we depend on. And heat also induces drought, which is similarly detrimental to primary production. So let's devote a couple of slides to understand climate change, the mechanism of climate change, of why we're looking at potential resource depletion. Before fossil fuel consumption, the flux of greenhouse gases and of heat were balanced, so the systems were stable. After we start to emit, we create this imbalance of source and sink rates, leading to increased greenhouse gases, which in turn leads to an imbalance on the heat that's flowing across the Earth system. And a positive source minus sink leads to increase of the amount of heat that's trapped in the biosphere, which we know is certainly coupled to how biological systems behave. And overall, the overall average impact of excess heat on ecosystems is one of making it more difficult for growth and production to happen, leading to a depletion of resources, the animals and plants that we depend on. So here is a conceptual illustration of fitness, essentially how well organisms can survive, that applies both to very simple bacterial colonies or single cell eukaryotes or even human societies. So on one axis, we have a parameter that describes how well or how likely organisms or societies would be cooperating or are sharing resources. And on the axis pointing up, y-axis or z-axis here, is how fit these individuals or societies would be. So in the case of a resource-rich planet, before the rise of modern civilization, perhaps in some locations, it was better to be very competitive and to exploit all the resources. However, as resources become depleted on planet Earth, the experiments on the cells at least suggest that increased level of cooperation and equality would provide a better chance for survival. And there's actually very little chance, at least based on data using the single cells, which are our ancestors in the very far distant past, that it's very unlikely to survive if we were to cling to this individualistic mode and competitive mode of survival that characterizes Western culture in the past a couple of centuries, a few centuries. So I'm a Chinese Canadian. I was born in China. So as a kid, I used to hear about creation stories. So I like to share what I remember as a child of some of the creation stories from my culture. So there is a character called Pan. He was the guy or the entity that's credited with creating earth and heaven out of chaos. So in the very beginning, apparently there was already the existence of a space of chaos. For example, like at early moments of the Big Bang. What Pangu contributed was to use his physical labor to chisel some kind of order out of chaos. And upon exhaustion, after lives of hard work, creating, decreasing entropy, creating order, he dies. And from his bone became the rocks and the mountains, and his flesh transformed into the soils. From his hair, we have the plants and the forests. And from his teeth and the nails, we have the metals. So it's a story of self-sacrifice, of devoting one's entire life to creating order. And in the end, devoting one's body to provide the plenty and the resources for future generations. And then there's also the goddess in the Chinese mythologies who created the humans. And she, in the end, sacrificed again her body and her eyes to repair a sky that was crumbling down. So I just want to share this to illustrate how the Eastern culture, at least one of them, views the origin of the world and perhaps what kind of leader or what kind of person or characters are ones that we should respect.
Sorry, Yi. I'm not sure how to help you address this, but it seems your microphone keeps dipping low as you're speaking. I don't know if there's something you can do about that, but just I think it keeps sort of going low at random times.
Okay, now give me 1 second.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Is this better?
Yeah, it's better. I think because what happens is you talk, you move. So be consistent, like with your distance to the computer.
Okay, I will try. All right, so there's two other legends, or I like to share. The first one is, I think, common in several Asian cultures, of a story where there was a period in Earth history where there were too many suns. Sometimes there's 10, sometimes there's 2. But there's stories of archers who would eliminate the extra suns. And that's somewhat relevant to the project that we'll be talking about. The other story is the story of a very stubborn old man who wanted to remove a couple of mountains that's separating him and his family and his community from nearby city or town. And he devoted his life and those of his descendants to removing by physical labor those mountains. So I will let you interpret the meaning that you perceive from these stories. So this past summer, in collaboration with Plymouth State in New Hampshire, we performed some preliminary experiments looking at the potential for using glass mirror for mitigating climate change. Here we have a plot of the cooling density of the ground underneath the mirror represented by the white square. So the redder it is, the more cooling was experienced by the soil. And we have a sensor represented by a white dot underneath the mirror.
Sorry, Yi, it seems to be doing that again with your microphone. So I'm not sure how to help you with this right now, just because it's like it's on your end with I guess the microphone that you're using, but yeah, I'm not sure how best to help you with this here.
Is this better?
Give us another check.
Okay. Give me 1 second.
Okay, that sounded okay.
All right. I know sometimes it happens with this pair of earphones. It interferes with the mic. Let's hope this is better.
Yeah, it could very well be the headphones.
All right. Has sharing started?
Yes, it has. Yes, it has.
Okay. And the cooling pattern can be tuned by using mirror at different heights. So if you make them 1 meter high instead of like say 50 centimeters, then cooling pattern can be spread out more. So here are time series comparing the temperature underneath the mirror versus the control field. And we can measure up to 4 or 5 degrees Celsius cooling at the soil depth of 10 centimeters. And that's quite a significant level of cooling for New Hampshire. One can also analyze the data by looking at a correlation between solar irradiance and the level of cooling. And that's consistent with the cooling being passive and essentially driven by the sun. In many areas of the US, for example, we have much higher levels of diurnal temperature variation. And if we were to suppose that the observation in New Hampshire were to extrapolate into those much more variable regions, then during the course of a day, one can expect up to 10 to 15 centimeters cooling of the soil. And this level of cooling would be very beneficial for confronting the worst of climate change. So currently we're looking at a couple of potential applications and larger scale field experiments, one of which is to measure the cooling of larger tracts of agricultural field as a function of different implementation density and implementation locations. The other is to look at the possibility to promote ecosystem recovery and also potentially for fire control by putting mirrors into different areas such as fire break depicted here. So mirrors can really work in concert with ecosystems, and in some cases perform better than ecosystems if we're talking about climate mitigation impacts. From a carbon virtual sequestration point of view, 1 meter squared of mirror is equal to 3 meters squared of Amazonian rainforest, up to 6 meters squared of Asian and boreal forest, and much better than secondary planted crop forests. in terms of overall climate benefits, they're about factor of 10 better on a per area basis. One could also consider using mirrors to replace vanishing sea ice. And the per area efficiency is also expected to be better than sea ice itself. So we think that we should really, be interacting with the youth and use the idea of controlling sunlight as an entry point to teach science in a hands-on manner. We calculated that if all the strikers on Fridays were to carry these signs, this reflective signs, they can together offset 1 megaton of CO2 on the day of the climate strike, which largely dwarfs how much these industrial plants can capture at the current time using current day technology. So another example, this plant in Switzerland captures about 1,000 tons per year, but the same quantity can be instantaneously offset simply by putting mirrors onto the roofs of a typical school. So with that, I'd like to thank people who funded the project and helped us at different levels and different stages of our work. I hand it back to Kevin.
Here. Okay, thank you very much. That was very informative. Okay, so we'll go back over to Pauline.
Thank you. Thank you, Ye. That was amazing. And when we get to the Q&A section, man, that was wonderful. That's stuff that I haven't heard yet, so I'm really excited to talk about it. I want to thank everyone again for being here. This is a really wonderful experience, and I have a short little piece to talk about, and I'm going to read it as I look back at you, but it deals with prophecy, climate change, hospice, anthropology. So my background and influence is Greek American. And we experienced 400 years of slavery under the Ottoman Empire, where our culture was pushed down, downtrodden. Our language was pushed down and downtrodden, and people were killed for doing their dances, their traditional dances, and wearing their traditional outfits. So there is some correlation and sympathy that the Greek people can feel for the native indigenous people of this continent. The other thing is that at the end of that 400-year occupation, the Greek people experienced Nazi occupation. And that came on the heels of the bird flu known as the Spanish influenza, which killed off 80% of Europe, and 80% of Greeks were killed as well. So there are so many interesting correlations that I feel like it's very difficult for people who don't come from that experience to really feel it viscerally and understand what it's like. And I have to say that even though I come from that background, I don't today have the same perspective as an indigenous person on this continent has. I don't feel the same ostracization that an indigenous person might feel. And that experience does imprint on a people's psyche, on their culture. and their self-image. And usually it takes violent revolution to free a people from those sorts of enslavements. And they usually will need outside help, whether it's political or military or both. It's very difficult to disenslave yourself alone. You need that help. But that's what the prophets are for. And I think that maybe there's another way to do this, to disenslave ourselves. So the prophecy, as we've talked about, and as you've shared, is something that is throughout all cultures and throughout history. And it cannot be explained scientifically. We do not have the technology to understand how prophecy works. It's just, whether we don't yet recognize the scientific mode of how people have this connection, or whether we're just walking blindly through our lives. We don't want to. There's no way to really truly understand why we don't quite know how prophecy works. So in my own experience with prophecy, it has led me on a journey through time to better understand my species, my planet, and my universe. And I was raised in a Christian household where I was programmed to have this limited view of the universe. But very luckily, I was actually born and lived for a while in Nigeria. So I had a window of perspective of other cosmologies, a different way to see the universe. And being a reader from a young child, I really loved, articles and magazines like National Geographic, which is something that I still really enjoy, more than just enjoy. And I was very fortunate because I grew up in Greece to be part of an experimental educational program that started in the US. And it was in the school that I went to in Athens. And it was called MAKOS, Man, A Course of Study. And I don't know if anybody here has even heard of that. So it's really interesting. It was an experiment in education to create a holistic learning experience for middle and high school students. And it was wonderful because what it did was it focused on anthropology and connecting people with the science, the sociology, the mathematics, all of these together through studying the Inuit of the Arctic, their customs, their lives, the animals they depend upon, and their spirituality. MAKOS is what inspired me to become an anthropologist and an educator. And unfortunately, it was short-lived. The conservative politicians in the US decided that the program threatened their own spirituality. And it threatened them by introducing to children, to students, that there were other ways of living and other cosmologies. And they really were, they were deeply offended. So they defunded it and made it go away. But it has had an incredible effect on the students who are now my age. We were all deeply influenced by this experience to see how other people lived. And, we don't really get that in our public school system. We don't get to see how other people live, and we don't get to study their spirituality. And it's politically motivated that way. So there is this view in the mainstream religions that the creator must be boxed in. He's jealous, he's demanding, and cannot tolerate questioning or science or evolution. And that is not a very powerful God in my view. So Makos challenged that view, and therefore it was defunded. But the spirit lives on. And prophecy has been a part of all cultures and religions for millennia. The prophets are messengers, and they give warnings and they give hope. And this is a tradition that has continued into modern day, but primarily through the indigenous people. You know, our modern culture does not accept prophecy. In fact, it frowns upon it. It considers it, you know, a form of madness or mental illness even. But it is a very important part of culture. So those of us who are entrapped or enslaved in our cultures may not even recognize that we are prophets because of how we have been brought up. So in my experience as an example, when I was 19, I had this dream that I could not explain for almost 10 years of my life. But it was a profound message from the universe, and it kept me searching for an answer for 10 years nearly. And when I finally did find the explanation for the dream, it was pretty remarkable. So what happened was, in this dream, I was met by a goddess, and the goddess told me to remember February 2nd. And I had no understanding what that was. I was 19 years old. I was going to church. I didn't know what this was, and nobody could explain it to me. And 10 years later, I serendipitously discovered what that meant and who this person was. And apparently it was a Celtic goddess who was a guardian, an environmental goddess, a guardian of the downtrodden and the poor. She was the defender and patroness of warriors who protected the weak. And when I discovered that, I decided that I would have a celebration on that holiday. And I had some friends over, and we lit candles, and we celebrated St. Bridget's Day, and that was the goddess of Ireland. And I had no idea that on that night in Ireland, they were celebrating her festival for the first time in 400 years. And it was such an incredible discovery, because I didn't find out that they did that for 10 more years of my life. When I went to Ireland to celebrate the same festival and met these wonderful people and began speaking with them, and they said, oh yes, we relit this 10 years ago. And I was just, you know, we all walk in blindness, asleep in dreams. And many of us carry the answers inside of us, and we don't even realize it. I would say that most of us do. But we have been taught not to listen to our intuition, or to our inner selves, or to our soul, or to the earth. The message that I received when I was 19 was to serve, and not just a goddess, but our mother. And it was a tradition in this pagan religion that the priestesses were called at the age of 19. And that just blew my mind. It opened so many windows to me and led me down this incredible path that has now today brought me to this point where I've been working with Guy McPherson and encouraging Dr. Ye's work. And I feel like for so long, humans, we have been fighting and playing for too long, and we have not come home to our mother. And it's time for us to come home. Our days are numbered. They truly are. And I feel like if we are to truly disenslave ourselves, it is so important and critical that we wake up our ability to hear ourselves and to be compassionate with each other. And as Ye pointed out in his presentation, we have scientific evidence that shows that altruism is the path ahead. Whether we survive or not, it is so critically important that we make some sort of attempt, a last attempt to save some life on this beautiful planet, our beautiful mother. And we can do that with the mirrors, with the mirror reflection framework, and with casking and containing nuclear waste. Because those two things, if we don't do those two things, we will put the nail in the coffin of this beautiful planet, our mother. Thank you.
Well, thank you too. One of the things that we know as people of the Longhouse is that we are always connected to our dreams. Our dreams is what connects us to our ancestors and the great mystery. So for us, we still follow that today. We've had many prophets that, in our whole history that talks about the importance and the significance of that. And you're right, here's a wampum belt. It talks about the idea of one dish with one spoon, that the earth is supposed to be the breadbasket for all of us. We're at the bosom or the breast of one mother, which is Mother Earth. And we're supposed to take what we need, share, cooperate, be mindful of those future generations that when they'll be born, they'll inherit a happy, safe, clean, beautiful, loving world. But with the introduction of money, and when you look at the debt-based monetary system that we have, I say this today, that all of us are nothing but mere economic slaves. And what we have to do is we have to educate ourselves and free ourselves from these bondages, because that monetary system is what is destroying us. So we're looking at, and I've been talking about developing a new currency. The new currency should be love. And what would be the medium that we would use to express that would be for us the staff of life, which is corn. Because in our creation story, the bosom, the breast of Mother Earth is where the corn grew from. And that for us, that's our staple along with the beans and squash. But anyway, absolutely, we have to set our minds free from any of these ideas or thoughts that says that we should be fearful, because once you give in to fear, then you can easily be manipulated and controlled. And I say fear absolutely nothing, because there's nothing to fear ever. In our creation story, we come from love and we're going to return back to love. So thank you for that. So we have two people that finally joined us. Tom Porter, good to see you. He was one of the guys who kind of lit in me the reawakening that helped me to get in this path, because I'll never forget when I first met him. And he said, before I want to share what I shared with you today, I want to give you the key to understanding the universe. And the key to understanding the universe for me was that Thanksgiving address that he started with. So it's nice to see you here, Tom. And we have a new friend that I haven't met either, Cheyenne McKay, who is just joined us too now. So these are the 8 panelists that I decided to engage. So let me just recap a little bit about why this all came about. So after last Christmas, we were given the idea to look at a strategic plan in 10 years. So as we're going to look 10 years, which is quite a way down the road, I said, all right, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to engage some of our knowledge keepers. Let's look at our own prophecies. So it was a 4-stage step process. So step 1 was, what does our own Iroquois Confederacy prophecy say? So I engaged 2, Jamie Jacobs and Richard Mitchell, 1 Mohawk and 1 Seneca. When that was done, and these were all based on the season, so that was done last winter. Then in the spring, I engaged the Inuit, people from North America, Central America, the Aztecs and the Mayans, all the way down to the Kogis. Because when I first saw that video that the Kogis produced in 1990, it's called the Elder's Brother Warning. I said to myself, these people get it. They don't live with electricity. They're a people that have no money. And the message that they brought out, they said, we're the elder brother. And we're going to remind you, our younger brother, that you're taking this world to the end if you don't begin to change what you are doing. Anyways, I was always inspired by that. And I said, I had to have to get the Kogies and that. So that was step 2. Step 3 now was to say, okay, big ship with sails. Let me just hear what all the scientists have to say. But for whatever reason, it didn't work out. And the only person that I was able to engage was Seth Klein. That's Naomi Klein's brother. And this is a book that he just put out in 2000, just before the coronavirus came out. And one of the things that he talks about is that if we're going to save ourselves with what's coming down the road, that pre-World War II, the public sector, the private sector, government, everybody got together and they said, look, we have a threat. And everybody mobilized and did their part. So now he said, with where we're going, we need that same type of attitude and thinking to deal with this climate emergency. So anyways, that was step 3. And now step 4, and again, this is all based on what I refer to as the supreme law of Turtle Island, which talks about how we're supposed to be in relationship. So I says, all right, now what we're going to do is we're going to take the best out of the canoe. What does our indigenous spiritual wisdom have to say? Let's take the best out of the big ship with sails. What is the best that they have to say with all the knowledge, scientific data that they have? And let's now say, all right, together, now that we have all this knowledge and information, what are the goals? What are the objectives? And what are the recommendations that we can start to talk about as we begin to move forward? So I was hoping that Kevin Hester would have joined us. He's not here. So I guess we'll get started with our side then. So I guess Tom Porter, you're kind of like our elder on here now, because if I look at the majority of us on this call, you're one of the ones then that has a lot of experience. You grew up with no electricity. You saw all the changes. You know, the scientists are saying that, you know, the ice caps are melting. Because those ice caps are melting, that's kind of like our refrigerator. We know that Galileo talked about that the earth is going to heat up and we're going to begin to witness all of this stuff, those diseases, those sickness. You look at the high winds that's happening. We're in the crux now of all of these things that said that was going to be right at our doorstep. But I'll take it one step further. It's not only at our doorstep, it's right in our house. So now I'm going to turn it over to you, Tom. When you look at where we are and what has to happen, what are the thoughts that you could share with us for the next 20 minutes or thereabouts? So I give it to you. Good morning. Can't hear you, Tom. You gotta go off mute.
Okay,
Okay, good.
all right. I greet everybody here that's on the computer today. And I don't know if you'll hear me good enough because I have a real bad cold. But I've been listening to what you are saying, and we are at the verge of, I think, almost, it might be too late, but I guess it's never too late anyway for certain things. But it's a decision that individuals have to make and the collective has to make as to if it's too late or not. So it's important, though, that I think that the different knowledges that our elders and prophet people have said and stated before be reviewed from all over the world, and to see what commonality there is and where did it veer from the path of the human journey? Where did it take a detour? And how come it didn't go back onto the main journey? And so that's what's happening, I guess, to us in the world, is we've been led by people who detours from the Creator's world and the instructions that He gave us. I think that the young people are the ones that we will put the burden on them, as they have done before. The old people that used to live, they put the burden on the kids. That was me and Kevin and all different people. They put those burdens on us. Will it survive or not survive? And so we had a choice to do. Do we want to embrace that duty that they put on our shoulder, that heavy weight, and do what we can? Or shall we just shred it off and just let it be and go on as normal? Well, needless to say that most of us have taken on that duty and that burden and tried to become teachers and sharing this knowledge with the old, the middle age, and the young people, especially the young people. As the young people will carry even more heavier load than we have. And it is important that they understand what the instructions of the Creator and the Mother Earth is, in order that people in the proper way. I think that I heard in some of the conversation that fear is the thing that motivates people to keep on the detouring road, keep people afraid or whatever, and then you'll keep control of them. And I think that's very true. So I also heard say that we have to unslave ourselves. That's a big task, because the slavery part has been instituted for so long all over the world, and that needs to be addressed, and it needs to be addressed fairly quickly as well. Evan, I don't know if you told the story of the two serpents,
No, I
the
didn't.
gold and you didn't tell it. Well, I'm going to try to relate that to you, but I haven't really spoken about that probably in the last 20 years
Okay.
in detail, as I used to do it. But it's recorded different places. It is said way back, and I think they meant before the European came here, that this is when this took place, that there were two men who went off in a canoe on the river, traveled. They were going to go hunt moose. I suppose it's going east or west. And so they were going to be gone quite some time. So they left, and they went, some people said one day, they camped out, and they left again, and they camped out a second time. And the third day, as they paddled on the canoe, they seen something shining on top of the river, and they never seen light before. It was very spectacular. And so just like the deer or a horse or a cow or anything in a pasture or in the woods, if they see something they didn't usually see, it attracts their attention and they'll go look at it. And Indian were the same way. And so they paddled their canoe over to the top of the water where that brilliant reflection was coming. And on top, a lily pad, a nice lily pad on top. And there were two little snakes on the lily pad, just little ones. One was gold colored, and the other one was silver colored. And so those two, and every time the waves moved a bit, the brilliant light came from that snakes. They reflected. It was very beautiful, all colors. And so those two guys, they said, well, if a hawk comes or an eagle comes or somebody, they see them, they're going to pluck them out of there, and the great brilliance and beauty that they have reflection of will be gone. And then they thought, if the waves or the wind should come, the waves will get big, and they could fall into the water, and the fish will eat them, and they'll be gone. So they came up with all kind of reasons why they should eat these two little snakes, one gold and one silver, how beautiful they are, how brilliantly they shine. And so they said, we should help them, and we will pick them off from that lily pad, and we put them in our canoe, and we will save them being destroyed, and we will take it home to where we live in our village, and everybody will see them, and pretty soon we're going to become big name too, because nobody ever seen such a thing or to discover such a thing. So they forgot all about why they were going up there to hunt a moose or whatever, caribou. They forgot there because these two serpents and the brilliance of their light detracted them from what they originally were going to do. So they picked the snakes up and they went home. And as they got home, all the kids come running to the shore as usually, because when hunters leave, they're gone for a day or two or three or more. And so the kids are playing. And when they see the canoe coming, they all run over there to greet them to bring home. So this time the canoe, as it was coming home, was shining bright lights in from the canoe. And so all the kids got excited, and everybody in the village ran over there to see what is that they got. They never seen it before. But when they got home, it was a great sensational thing. So they said, the reason we picked these two snakes up is because we never seen it before. They're beautiful, and they have such brilliance to them. And we don't want the birds or eagle or hawk to get them, or fish or any animals to get them and destroy them. And we should save them, try to help them. So they told the kids to get saplings and stick it in the ground. And they made like a stockade. Oh, I don't know how big. It wasn't too big, because the snakes were only little ones. They put them in a stockade, and then they told the kids, if you can go hunt for grasshoppers and crickets and mosquito or a fly or anything small, and give it to them, and they'll eat it, and then they will grow. So the kids would do that. They would gather the different insects, small ones, and they would feed them. But no matter how many kids fed them, they never were satisfied to eat. They kept eating and eating and eating. And just in a matter of a couple of days, they were no longer this big. They had become this long. And then as some more days passed, they fed them more. This time they have to feed it birds and mouse and different bigger frog, and different bigger things. And by this next few days, they're not this long anymore. They're several yards long and more silver and more golden color. And as they move, the more brilliant light, beautiful it is. And then they had to build a bigger stockade. This time they had to use poles like they use in a village, stockade for a village. And they put them in there, these two snakes that are now many yards long, but very beautiful. And so now they have to hunt beavers and muskrat and raccoon to feed those, because they're always hungry. And they're hunting spice. Next thing they had to hunt a deers and a moose and feed them. And they got bigger and bigger. This time now they're probably a couple 100 foot long, maybe. and big around. And so one morning, there was a big commotion, but they noticed one thing about them. That these two serpents never slept. They never sleep. They're always, always, day and night, never sleep. And so this one morning, it was the custom of all the people that just soon after dawn, and when the sun is brand new, everybody was up and getting ready for their daily chores, whatever they got to do to live. That was the custom. Nobody slept until it was 8 or 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock. It was like kind of shameful to be like that. Even when I was a kid, they didn't let us sleep. They early in the morning they would wake us up. It's custom from the old days. Anyway, that early morning, women were already cooking over the fires in the coolness of this. I don't know if it was fall time or whatever, but early in the morning it's cool, and smelling of the food and all that throughout the village. All of a sudden, they heard a screaming, really agonizing screaming, terrifying, and they heard the poles of the stockade where those two serpents, it was cracking, because that two snake were not satisfied to be enclosed. They weren't satisfied that they were being fed. There wasn't enough. The people couldn't do enough for them. So they broke through the stockade and crushed it. And the kids that were trying to feed them, that silver and gold snake began to swallow and devour the people, the kids. It was mostly the kids. Then they said, when they ran over there to find out what was the big commotion, and they seen in the mouth of the snake that some of the kids' body is in their mouth, and only the legs is sticking out, kicking, trying to get free. And then they swallow them up. And so the older people said, well, we'll grab sticks and stones and we'll hit that serpent. Maybe it'll, when they hit it, it will vomit. The kids will be all right. The just happened just now. So maybe it'll vomit, they'll be okay. But when the older people went over there to save their kids, that snake got more mad when they hit it. And that snake come up and grabbed them and swallowed them too. And so pretty soon everybody was terrified. Nobody knew what to do. They have no plan how they're going to save themselves. And so one man said, well, let's do this and we'll get rid of that problem. But another woman and a man said, no, let's do it this way and we'll get rid of them faster and quicker. And then other people, no, that's not right what you said. Let's do it this way. And they began to bicker and argue how they were going to deal with this problem. And so as they bickered and argued, that snake will eat more of them. So it was terrifying to them. No plan, nothing to tell them what to do. And then all of a sudden, they said the Creator tried different things to help them, but they won't listen because they were so afraid. And the impact of this monsters eating on them and their kids, it terrified them. So they weren't about to listen to anything. So finally then the Creator used the lightning and he shot the lightning, even it shook the ground. It was, and then the big wind came. And the wind came through the long houses and through the big trees, shh, like that. And then that wind is talking. It says, that means the wind said, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to talk to you, and you have to listen when I'm going to tell you how to get this problem. And then that wind said, there's going to be a little boy that's going to be coming, a little boy, a laksa. In the Mohawk, that means a little boy. Laksana. And this little boy is gonna tell you, and he's gonna guide you. And this little boy is going to say, what we got to do is we got to get a certain tree and make a bow out of the tree, a certain tree. And then you got to use a cedar tree and to make an arrows. And then you have to use a flint, a white flint, and put it on the arrows. And then you have to take from the real clan mother, to emphasize that word, real clan mother, hair from the real clan mother, and braid it up. And then that hair of the clan mother, the real one, it will string your bow. And then when you have prepared all these things, then he says, then that little boy will take you to the top of the hill, or the hill country, top of the hill. And you'll go with that, follow him. But it doesn't matter where you go, you can't run away from that silver and that gold snake. And then pretty soon, from all this commotion, that two snakes by themselves, silver one went into the woods in the north, and the gold one went into the woods in the south. And so because it wasn't right in their village anymore, there was a certain amount of, the fear was lessened quite a bit. And so they kind of relaxed a bit, but they were always in the back of their mind, very fearful that snakes could come back tomorrow or the next 2 days, and even they will be bigger than they were. And so weeks and weeks went by, days went by, and then a couple of runners came in from hunting, and they said, I seen that north. That snake is now many miles long and big as the mountain. And when that snake crawls over woods, it knocks all the trees down. There's no trees standing. And when that snake crosses the rivers or the creeks, it makes the river go a different way than it used to go before. So it's not free anymore, the river. And when that snake does that, it muddies the water up, so that if you were to bathe in that water, your body will become more dirty than it was before you bathed. And then another days came in from the south, and they reported the same thing. And they said they followed that snake to where its head is, and where its head is, where the eyes and the mouth is, it's like the gajiliaks. They call it the gajiliaks. You know, ambulance or a policeman's car, when the light goes on, it goes like that. It throws. That's what it means, the gajiliaks, from their eyes. And it doesn't matter every day or night. It's always like that. And from their mouth comes a grayish air. And if you get too close to it, the air will catch you and immobilize you. And then they eat up. And that's what I heard. That one came from Standing Arrow used to say this all the time. And also my grandmother's uncle, his name was Aluhyadaoko. He used to say that. And also, I thought just only our family or our reservation says that. But in 1968, the White Roots of Peace went to Green Bay, Wisconsin. And they asked me to tell that story there. So I told them just like I'm telling you. And there was a woman there. She was the woman of the Oneida, I guess. I think she was close to 100 years old. And when I got halfway through telling that story, said, let's take a break. And we'll continue on. And that old woman, she talks Oneida. And I can talk Oneida too. I can understand it because it's almost the same as Mohawk. And she said, when we get back from the break, that if you want, I will give you a break. And I continued that story because I know that story. When I was a little girl, I heard that story.
Hmm.
And I said, no, it's okay, I can finish. But I was glad she was willing to help. I didn't know that they knew that too, and I was so happy about it. Because not many people talks about that. Anyway, then the story quits. The little boy will take you to the hill, top of the hill. But no matter what, the snakes will come and find you. You can't hide. But if you have put those together, and I used to get kind of upset with my grandfather, great-grandfather, because he never finishes the story. He only goes to where they're at the top of the hill, and the snakes find us, and they go up, and they're ready to eat us all up for the last time. And that's where he quits. And I'm upset with him, but he leaves us in suspense, never finishes the story. Then some years later, when I got a little older, I would question him more about that story. How come you never finished? He says, well, you're just a little kid. That's why you won't understand. So I can tell you now more. And here's what he said about it. He said that silver snake represents Great Britain and Canada. And the gold snake represents the United States. And he said that bow is made out of special tree, and he emphasized special tree. You got to make the bow. That's the, and the three hairs from the real clan, and he said real grandmother, and he emphasized that. You braid that three hairs from the real grandmother, and you put it on the bow, because that's where the power comes. It makes the arrow get thrown to where you want it to go. And that arrow is just going to be made out of cedar, which is a medicine tree. It heals people, doctors and spiritual leaders. And you put those all together in its true form. Then you will go there to the top of the hill with that little boy, saw. And when you are on top of the hill, that silver will come from the north and the gold serpent from the south and go above the mountain where you are, open their mouth to the last time. That little boy and the people, you will take that bow and arrows and arrowhead and all that, and you will pull it with all your might, and you will aim it towards their head. But he says that doesn't mean to kill him. It doesn't mean to bloodshed. It means that what are the principles of our great law, of our woman, of our spirituality, our original teachings. Those are the white arrowhead that's supposed to be our chiefs. And they will be empowered by the women and the people. For the bow, special bow is also the people who give it power. with that knowledge, it will be given to them, not to kill them, but to put the goodness into their mind. The way that the Creator did when He first put the first man and woman of our people, women, on the earth. I like it when they say that ne wasugo dastanyo o nagadine chinaha chinuhielo. So good ni gung lata chini huli hoda so go ya dis so ato gadi hudili hoda hak no go. That means He stood up the man and woman when the world was new. The Creator did after making us, and then He transformed His ideas into the minds of the man and woman, and He said, "This will be the way you will live on the earth," and that's what we call the original instructions. And that's why I used to tell Kevin before that is the skeletal key of how, if we are going to be successful humans to live in the world, that's the one, the skeletal key that will lead our journeys to have a good life the way the Creator and Mother Earth wants it. And then that time, this was in 68, they had a big meeting in Oklahoma of all the traditional people and our longouts, and I was their interpreter, and my aunt Anna Jock was helped to drive them there. And when we got there, Onondagas called up from Onondaga, New York, and they said that the Southern, I think they call it Southern Baptist group, led by Abenaki, I think his name was Abenaki or Abenaki, and also the Connecticut Luther King group. They're going to do a Poor People's Campaign in Washington, 68. So they call up Onondaga and they ask if the Iroquois Haudenosaunee people can get in a trailway bus and Greyhound bus, that they will pay for the buses from Syracuse or Buffalo or wherever, and all Senecas, Mohawks, and Oneida Cayuga bus, and come to Washington to the Poor People's Campaign, because the Indians are the first people of this country, so they should lead that Poor People's March. And so the word came to Oklahoma that time, and they had a meeting there, the Iroquois people did, and they said, we can't send nobody over there because we don't know what's the Poor People's March. What does it entail? Will it be dangerous for our to go there, not knowing? So they asked that time through the phones if myself and my aunt Anna Jock would catch an airplane in Oklahoma City, I think it was called Oklahoma City, and go to Washington to be the ears and the eyes of our chiefs to report back to them what does that mean, Poor People's Campaign, before they would consider what they requested. Myself, in 1968, had never ridden an airplane, and we never thought we would ever in our life ride an airplane. And so we were really scared to death to do that. But because our chiefs asked us to do it, we just bit the bullet of fear and we went on the airplane. But I'm glad we did, because when I was on the airplane, I could see where the rivers were changed and where there were dams and the river where the snake went through. And then as I went on from the top in the airplane, I could see all the different roads that looks like snakes crisscrossing everywhere. And then when I go through the Pennsylvania mountains in an airplane, I seen devastation of what they call when you cut all the forests down and not leave anything. I seen that with my own eyes. And so if I had not gotten on the airplane, this would not have meant too much to me, but because I seen it, it all came real close and clear. And so it's up to our young. And I believe that our young, I did have a dream or a vision, or what do you call it? I think it's recorded when they did the Great Law stuff, that our young will be given 7 than my age was given to revive who we are, what we are, and where we're going. And so they will become the teachers of not only our own, but I think the world. As I used to remember when I was a little boy, they used to say, and I didn't think there was nothing to it, but I do now. They said, "Katkeksoa, gonitudionsa, ohuntadi dana huntuanada hunsadat." That means one day our children will speak. The whole world will listen to them. And when I was a kid, nobody listens to the Indians. Nobody. Nobody gave us 2 cents or nothing. And so I never thought that was part. But since that time when I was a kid, our different leaders and some of our youth have gone to Geneva at the United Nations in New York several times and spoken at world conferences. And the world has been starting to listen. And so the young will even be given 7 times more power to do what they have to do. But people that's my age and us, we won't be here that much longer. So all we can do is nourish our young, valuable, beautiful young guys and girls and have the faith that they will do with that 7 powers the right. So that is what I know about one of the prophecies that's rarely ever talked about.
Okay. All right, Yonko Tom, that was excellent. Because that prophecy story that you told, we'll come back to it after in the question and answer period. We're not going to take no break. If some of you have to go, you can just shut off your your screen and you can take your time. We'll just continue on right through. Okay, so now we're going to move on to Rick.
Well, thanks for giving me the worst job to follow Tom Porter. Hello, Tommy. It's good to see you again. I don't know how many times I've heard Tom tell this story, but every time he tells it, there's always something new that comes to light. There's always a different way to think about things. So I appreciate that telling. You know, when I think of prophecy among the Haudenosaunee, which is the Mohawk, the Seneca, the Cayuga, the Onondaga, the Oneida, the Mohawk and the Tuscarora people, that I didn't hear these until I was about 24 years old. And one of the first things that struck me, they said that basically the world might come to an end in about the year 2100. When I was young, that seemed like a long ways away, but I'm 71 years old now. And if that prediction is true, we got about 78 years. So think about it. The babies that are born today will either witness the end of the world as we know it, or will be responsible for forestalling those dire predictions of the future. I also agree with Tommy and Kevin to mention this. Unfortunately, among our people, our prophecies have led to a lot of fear mongering. People living in fear about what to do. However, in my lifetime, there's been a great cultural revival, and more people doing more things to try to keep a tradition, language, ceremonies going. But anyway, I started thinking about a couple of things, and I'm going to focus on the creation story and what are the warnings that came from that. But it raises some big questions. How long are we going to be able to live here on the earth? But it also raises questions about freedom of choice. Humans were given this free will, and it can either be our undoing, meaning that we're not going to do anything, or we think we can do whatever we want, or it may lead to our salvation by turning our minds to the matter in such a way. The old people, when I was learning, used to say, no matter what the prophecies say, don't let it be your generation in which it happens. So you got to work really hard to keep things going. So we persisted on that. Otherwise, you can get really quite depressed. What the challenge that we really face is how can we foster global value change for the sake of survival? The scientific presentations today were very interesting, quite enlightening about the nature of this change, but there was also something in there about adaptation and about sharing. And I just want to kind of review some of these instructions that we've received. So think about this. When our world was first created a long, long time ago, the creator was about to make humans. He made this beautiful world that was all about perpetual regeneration. Things are constantly going to be coming alive again. And but there was his brother. We refer to him as Flint, this creature whose body was covered with flint, who was a kind of a destroyer. So our universe is set up with these contesting entities, that which wants to perpetuate life and that which wants to destroy life. Humans then are born in the middle of that. Anyway, we're made from the clay of the Mother Earth, so that's why we have this connection to her, and that's why our bodies are part of the sacred universe. Now, we don't have the word prophecy in our languages, but we certainly have ample evidence of the warnings that were given to humans when the world was first made. And basically, those warnings are, the creator says, I've created this beautiful situation for you. Everything here can be to your benefit. There's food, there's a medicine, there's the beauty of the world, get you spiritual enjoyment. He said, but I ask a couple of things, that you be eternally grateful for what's provided. You express that gratitude openly and freely and daily. And there's certain things we're supposed to be doing. If we don't do them, he basically said, there's consequences for human behavior. It could be positive consequences, but there's also some negative consequences. And he gave us a lesson. He says, watch the strawberry. You know, it's this little tiny plant. He says, at a certain time of year, those strawberries are going to ripen, and you got to go collect them, and then you eat them. And it shows you that life is going to continue to unfold the way it's intended. But you know, those little wild strawberries are very small. You go to the grocery store today, you can get these, humongous genetically altered strawberries. That don't have that spiritual force that it's talking about. But anyway, he says, I've given you this as a food, as nutrition, to help with your mind, your body, and your spirit. So when you go to do that, give thanks, have this ceremony. So he set in motion this idea that we're supposed to celebrate and honor and respect the things that nature provides for us, the fruits, the berries, the corns, the fish, the birds, the animals. All of this comes into to us to allow us to sustain ourselves. But he said, if we don't honor these things, they'll just move away. So when I think about the loss of species, even in North America, the loss of the passenger pigeon, it's because they weren't respected. They weren't kept in balance. And it was human greed, lust, even lust for killing, that destroyed many of these species. And because we've neglected them, they just move away. They just leave. They go somewhere else. Kevin mentioned this dish that the creator said, the earth is like a big dish that has all this great bounty in it. And it's here for us to share. And it provides all of that humans need to be happy and healthy. That's all, it's provided right there from our mother. He says, but there's some simple rules. You have to respect what's in the dish, meaning because your life depends on the stuff in the dish, express this gratitude for it. You literally, every time you eat, you should give thanks for the food. Every time you wake up, every time you take a drink of water, that's what he's saying. But when you stop doing that, it tends to move away. It says, well, I guess they're not grateful, so why should I continue to do what I do? He said, only take what you need for your short-term needs. In other words, you're in relationship with the environment. As medicines ripen, you use them. As the plants ripen, you use them. He says, don't hoard away food, that comes from the dish. We're not meant to be greedy. And it goes back to the issue of sharing. Remember the new alternative within the scientific model, that only through sharing, collectiveness, can we perpetuate that public good. He said, also leave something in a dish for everybody else. You take what you need, but you always make sure there's something left. What does that mean? It's kind of a simple thing. You don't take the first medicine plant you see, you leave it there. Maybe the second one you leave there, maybe even the third one. And then eventually you're assuring that there's that plant, that whatever coming from the dish will be there for the future generations to enjoy. And then he said, keep the dish clean. Don't waste what we're provided. Don't just kill a deer to get that, the back strap venison. You got to use everything. Use the hide, use the bones, use the hair, use the hoofs, use everything to show that deer who gave its life that you really appreciate what it's done. Now, we think about that and look at what we do. We live so far away from how our food gets produced, so far away from where our medicine comes from, so far away from where our household goods come from. It's hard to have that kind of relationship to the dish that they're talking about. And what happens is that he said that our happiness depends on that relationship and depends on that compassion we have for each other. When we lose that compassion, when we don't care what happens to other people, the dish responds, and it slowly starts keeping those things away from us. Because really what this is about, to sustain ourselves, it's about the quality of our thinking, the power of our beliefs, and let's just say the warmth of our heart, to really believe that thing that Kevin talked about, that this love we're supposed to have for each other. He also said when humans disagree with one another, when you start fighting over what's in the dish, he said everybody will suffer and the principles of life will be lost. I fear we're so close to that right now. If you don't have money or a credit card, sometimes it's hard to just feed yourself. But they're going to the grocery store to buy food that's not good for you anyway. That's a whole other story. Anyway, as the creation rolls on, the Creator made these seasons because remember, this is a place of perpetual regeneration. So we got to go from spring to summer to fall to winter. But his brother Flint kind of got control over the nighttime and over winter. So think of it this way. He loved his brother, so he didn't kill him, just like the Tommy's story. You don't kill what threatens you, you try to transform it. So he said, okay, I, the good-minded twin, will take care of the daylight, what happens during the day. You will kind of govern at night. However, he said, I'm going to put the grandmother moon and the stars in the night to help protect the humans. And they're going to be involved in helping to create moisture that will continue life in humans, in all animals, and in plants. So he created this scenario that even though there's darkness and then there's coldness, there's always this hope. However, Flint then created this spirit of winter who comes in and he puts ice over everything. His intention is to kill all living things. And that's the risk we run. Look at now the fierce of the winter because of climate change. He sends big snowstorms, he sends hail, he sends cold, icy winds. He puts ice over everything. So what the Creator said, on the shortest day of the year, which is usually the winter solstice around December 21st, you gather together and you express this mutual gratitude and you plead with the earth, please make sure you warm again. Make sure you bring those little sprouts back again. Make sure that life recovers. Because think of it this way, the days are getting shorter. If we don't do anything, darkness will take over our lives. So what we call our midwinter, we're supposed to gather collectively to humble ourselves and to ask for this. The one thing he asked for at that time was that we were supposed to sacrifice this white dog because some people say it's his favorite food, but according to this one creation story, what it says is that the dog is a sacrifice to ensure that the animals in the winter won't freeze. Because a lot of them do, it gets so cold. It's to ensure that the crops will come up again. I think Tommy talked about that from the breast of our mother, that the plants will grow again. And also ensure that new babies are born into a world so that there's a continuous line of humans who will stand on the earth, but will always give thanks by burning tobacco, looking skyward, and giving thanks for what we have. Now that breed of dog has disappeared. So I often wondered, what's the consequences of that? Well, even if we want to do that, we can't. Well, we made some substitutions. Now we burn a basket decorated with ribbons, with tobacco. We're still trying to do the same thing, but you see how critical that is to make sure that the animals don't die, to make sure that the plants germinate in the spring, and to make sure that babies continue to be born. That's some big stuff. Tommy mentioned about these snakes, and it's an overall theme about these big serpents that were put under the ground by Flint to destroy the purity of our water, to spread disease and pestilence, and to devour humans. And with the interesting between the story we heard earlier of the ancient bowmen and Tommy's story of the bow, the thunder beings were put into place to always watch that, given that power of thunder and lightning, to always try to chase those serpents away. They're always going to be here. And if humans neglect their duty to thank the thunder beings, guess what? They're going to stop doing what they do. And then those serpents are going to come and do all of that nasty stuff that they're intended to do. So you see, there's a pattern here. Yes, we have free will, but we should joyously go to wanting to express our gratitude through ceremony for these things. We should have the kind of relationship with all of this that we acknowledge. So that's why Tommy was mentioning, this is the key to understanding the universe. When we give thanks for all of these things, it's on purpose. It's so that they continue to do the job that they do. And so when we hear these great thundering voices, it's both a warning, those serpents are on the rise, but it's also kind of a happy relief. They're going to come and bring these refreshing rains. They're going to cleanse the water. The lightning's going to cleanse the air and try to make it so that humans can continue. However, they said, the Creator said, now, if you ever hear the thunder beings coming from the east heading west, that's a signal that things on Earth are in really bad shape, and it's liable, life as we know it's liable to come to an end. So the other day, I was sitting on my back porch. I heard this rolling thunder. It's just like it went on and on for like 20 minutes, and I never heard that before in all my life. And in my mind, I imagined there's all of the thunder beings. They're gathering. They're trying to decide what to do. At any minute, I was expecting a big thunderbolt to flash, but they just kept rolling across the sky. So in the beginning, I was kind of afraid. In the end, it was reassuring. And I burned my tobacco to give thanks that they're still doing their job. They're reminding us. So every time you hear the thunder, they're reminding you that they want to do their job, but they're looking for humans to acknowledge that. And so it gives them the energy to continue on. Another part of the story, or several parts, explain, though, that the Creator gets very unhappy when humans disagree and start fighting. He said, this isn't the way we're intended to live, and he wants us to continue on. However, his prophecy was the day is going to come when fewer and fewer people are going to know how to do the ceremonies. In fact, ceremonies may come to an end in some communities. And then again, remember, there's consequences for that on. So he encouraged people that if you don't want Flint to win the day, you have to make sure you have this, express this continual love for one another. We've got to treat everybody as if we're members of one family. We've got to find a way to live in peace, stop arguing among ourselves, stop fighting. He says, because that fighting causes a kind of a psychic disruption in the world. So he said that what will happen without the ceremonies, without our language, without our traditions, people will literally go insane. They won't know what to do. Now, when you look today, especially among Indigenous people, mental health issues are one of our #1 health things. And a lot of our young people have no idea who they are, what they're supposed to do. And they're all confused about their identity and their wrong. The rate of suicide in our communities is, I think it's like 9 times the average. Our people are in trouble because they don't understand the nature of this universe as explained in our Thanksgiving and in our creation story. He said, then the people will start killing one another because it gets so, they're so insane, they start destroying that life, making Flint very happy. But he says, we got to think about that. He says, fear will overtake our people and I'll freeze them. And then they'll begin to spread rumors and lies through gossiping about each other. Boy, if that's not where we're at right now, I don't know. That's just really, and then diseases follow that, and people begin to die off. That's a pretty dire future. But what he's saying, it's caused by human arrogance. When humans start disagreeing and arguing, that was part of what Tommy's story was about. Remember when they're arguing about what to do? That causes us to be weak. So what the Creator said, that therefore there became two paths here in the world. The path of those who put through the ceremonies, try to keep everything going, and the path of people who don't. And that leads to suffering and ruin. Among the Haudenosaunee, it depends on how you count it. Let's just say there's only about 150,000 of us in the whole world. Out of that, we're lucky if 10% of the people actually do the ceremonies, and maybe 5% actually speak their language. So we're in that very dire circumstances where even if we want to, sometimes it's very difficult to do that. Can 10% of the people keep the world rolling for the benefit of the 90%? Can 150,000 Haudenosaunee people, even if everybody believed the same thing and danced the feather dance the same day, shook that rattle that Kevin showed you, is not enough to offset what 7 billion people in the world aren't doing? I don't know about this. So I know we're trying to find how can indigenous wisdom impact on this, but if you look at what the Creator is saying, you have to live indigenously in order for the world to continue. And that means all of us. We all have to be doing these ceremonies. Let me just finish here with talking about the sun, our brother, the sun. He's supposed to be like our guardian. Every day he comes over, watches over the creation, watches to see what humans do. At noon, he kind of lingers for a while. And guess what he sees? He sees people fighting. He sees war going on everywhere. He sees blood being spilled. This makes him very upset. So you know what he does? He turns up his thermostat. He sends extra powerful sun rays down to people, trying to get our attention. So climate change is because our elder brother is trying to get us to look skyward to realize the sacred origins of our being and get reconnected back to that. But if people continue to ignore him, you know what he does? He intensifies that sun even more, so that it begins to burn our skin. Because he's saying, if you're not paying attention, I got to get your attention somehow. So I think the rise in sun intensity, the rise in skin cancer is all attributed to, again, this human arrogance of thinking we know better, that we don't have to do what we're supposed to do. Eventually, if we ignore him, he said, the sun is going to turn into what they call the spirit of the earthquake. He's going to shake the earth. He'll make the ground tremble, trying to get our attention through heat. If that doesn't work, he's going to shake our feet, trying to get us to realize that we're reaching this tipping point where we haven't fulfilled our spiritual obligations to the earth, and therefore everything that humans made are going to fall down. Everything's going to tumble. And he's going to continue to shake it more and more and more. And then if that still doesn't work, he's going to send these fire spirits down. That's where everything's going to catch fire. And then life as we know it will come to an end. Well, you grew up hearing this stuff, you can see it can be quite depressing. But attached to that is always the caveat. Change your thinking. Do those ceremonies. Do that planting. Be grateful. Treat each other well. Share what you have. That's the antidote to climate change. That's the antidote to these projections of things that could happen into the future. So I've tried really hard in my life to recover the knowledge of our ancestors, try to find ways to strengthen and bolster our leaders and the people who do these ceremonies, try to use art to help people connect back to that ancestral voice, and finding ways in which we can rebuild that connection. But I have to tell you, every day I wake up, I feel, I guess it depends on which side of the bed I get out on. I can feel very depressed. It's all too late. We've gone way past the tipping point. And now we can't force belief on people. And then also I get frustrated because I keep hearing from indigenous people not to share our ceremonies, where their very instruction is everybody is supposed to be doing these ceremonies. Everybody, not just people with a status card. And so we have to look at how do we engage between the canoe and the ship in a new way so that the functions and the actions of the ship quit having the devastating impact on the water, the land, and the people that it's had in the 500 years of colonization. And guess what? I think that can only happen through a spiritual transformation, where that indigenous thought that was planted here in the world when the world was made becomes the standard, becomes the new norm. And that may be the only thing that we can do that. In other words, although I think the idea of the mirrors, that's really cool, but if we don't have that mind shift and that spiritual connection back to the power of the sun, he's more powerful even in those mirrors. So they have to work in concert with one another. We got to find a new kind of spiritual science that recognizes that there's certain powers that were innate in the universe that we have to get in tune with. Anyway, that's what I wanted to share with you today. I look forward to hearing more and continue with our discussion. I have a lot of questions that I would like to ask our group as well. So Kevin, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Rick. So we're going to go to Ashley now. She's one of our youth. She's a woman in the prophecy. Tom talked about the power of our women that have to be that string that eventually when we get together, we'll complete that bow. Anyway, so we're going to turn it over to you, Ashley.
Miigwech Kevin. Bajon in the way Magna Dog Megaze or Memengwans Indigenous Megaze and Dodem. My home communities are Wikwemikong and Dokis First Nation, and I'm out here in Mi'kmaq territory in Moncton, New Brunswick. I just wanted to say Chimigwech to everyone for all the sharing. I was brought up speaking openly about prophecy since I was a kid. I've been having dreams about great floods. I've been having dreams about the lakes disappearing of the water, war, all of these great things that we're talking about that could happen if we don't start listening to what the earth is saying. If we don't start understanding what relationship is. You know, when I first reached out to Kevin was about a month ago, because I needed some support and some of the work that I'm doing. I was being told that there was going to come a time in my life when I wouldn't be able to look at the news. I wouldn't be able to look at my family. I wouldn't be able to look at my peers for the direction that I need to go to. And the only place that I would be able to look to was spirit, because it was the only place that wouldn't have a hidden agenda for what's to come. And growing up with that information, it was a lot. Thinking about this time that's coming, this time that's here. So about 3 years ago, my little brother, Akadoma Geba, his name means teacher. He passed away of a drug overdose. And since then, I've really immersed myself in healing through our traditional ways, which has really connected me spiritually to offerings, to the earth. And it led me to move out to the East Coast, to Moncton, New Brunswick. I'm from Sudbury, Ontario. And since I've been out here and doing offerings with the land, to the birds, and thanking the land for allowing me to be in this safe space, because it feels like home. I've been hearing the earth and what it's been saying. And when we start understanding that relationship we have with the earth is so reflected in ourselves, all of this extraction that we're doing, we're pulling out all the oil from her. And we're seeing that in the arthritis in our body. We're seeing that on that bone and bone action. We're seeing the water being polluted. We're seeing the cancer, the blood diseases. And now we're seeing her oxygen being attacked. The water and the trees are burning. And we're seeing that reflection with this new disease, COVID. All the things we've done to her is being reflected in us. We're seeing all of those implications within ourselves. So when we're talking about relationship, and what I've heard a lot of is about this relationship with the earth, relationship with ceremonies, relationship with each other. But for generations, we have been taught and conditioned, and it's almost like we have this inability to communicate with each other. So I've grown up going to school. I just finished my master's degree because I was told that the only way that our teachings could be heard, the way that we could be heard, was to get that piece of paper so that I could come into places, into institutions, to talk to leaders about what's happening on this earth, and to bring that voice of our people into these spaces. And I'm just starting out that. It's very intimidating. Having these conversations and talking about prophecy, because, you know, growing up, knowing these things and seeing these things in dreams and visions, people thought I was crazy, you know, the end of the world, conspiracy theories, but it's all very real. And I think that we're all seeing that right now. And so this need for gratitude is so important when we're talking about relationship. You know, when I go out and do my morning offerings, I can tell when I'm grateful for the day, because my days usually go a lot better than when I don't do my tobacco offerings in the morning and I don't say that I'm grateful and I don't say my prayers for that day. My days are a little bit wonky and a little bit harder to get through. So it's within that we need to start looking towards our ceremonies. And just like what Rick was talking about, you know, in my little brother's funeral, he had a lot of friends that were white, and we had his funeral in the reserve. And I was getting a lot of phone calls, you know, is it okay for me? Is it safe for me to come onto the reserve? Is it okay for me to come to his funeral? And I said, of course. This is your brother. My little brother was their brother. He was so close with so many people. And there's all these youth, you know, and we had his body, his vessel in our Medewin Lodge, in our teaching lodge. And then when his friends got to that space, and then they asked if they could go in that lodge to see him. And we encouraged them to. And throughout that experience, and doing that funeral in that way, and having all of his friends and community in that space, in that lodge, you know, they gave gratitude for the ceremonies that we shared, because they were able to feel something within themselves. They were able to create understanding of what it was when we move on from this world. They've never been to a funeral where they left with an understanding of what happens. They've never been to a funeral where they felt that connection and felt their spirits. So after that 4-day funeral, there was all these youth that were coming to my house, you know, all of his friends, and they were sleeping on the floor in my living room. I had an air mattress and blankets all over my place. And they wanted to know more. They want to heal. They want to understand. And so we actually brought them to Niagara Falls, and we did water ceremony with them at the bottom of the falls. And there's a little martin that came up, and, you know, and just like these confirmations that, you know, when we're doing ceremonies and we see those confirmations, we understand them. But For our settler brothers and sisters, they don't always recognize those. So when they do see those confirmations, they start understanding what these ceremonies can do, how creation listens to the words that are being spoken and to the ceremonies that we're doing. So it was very powerful. And then we went to go and see my uncle, Peter, and he set up a sweat lodge for us, for the youth. And he allowed us to go into that sweat lodge, you know, my little brother's friends. And it was just for us. And it was their first time being in sweat lodge, and they weren't really sure, but they talked about those experiences and how it impacted their spirits, the things that they saw, the things that they started to understand. So I think it is so important that we start sharing our ceremonies, our ways, because they're human ways to want to feel and understand who we are as spiritual beings. We're all spiritual beings in physical vessels. So we need to start sharing these because they're human teachings, they're human understandings of what it is to be in relationship. We've been taking from our Mother Earth for so long, and we haven't been reciprocating that love, that unconditional love that she has for us. Even when we talk about reconciliation, you know, we need to start reconciling with the earth, and all of these conversations are going to become easier when we start realizing what our common goals are. And, you know, and miigwech to Kevin for creating this space where we can share in this way, because these are the types of dialogues that are needed for us to create understanding about where both of us are coming from. So often Western knowledge has been at the forefront, but in Indigenous ways, there is no siloed science, math, language, spirituality, all of those things are interconnected. So it was always emphasized to me that everything I need to know was inside of me. All of that generational knowledge that my ancestors carried runs through my blood. And, you know, when I first saw and heard about those children, it was about 4 months, I got a message from my little brother from the spirit world that me and my family, we need to start putting out food for the forgotten ones. So we started doing that on a monthly basis, putting out food for the forgotten ones. And then the news came out about the unmarked grave and those children being found. And, you know, that's where our relationships, all of these conversations that we're having right now, this was the exact intent of colonization. This was exactly what they intended us to have conversations about. That's where they tried to break our ties, is with those children. But those children, they're our ancestors. So they carry all of those teachings. So by doing these offerings, making those relationships with our ancestors and trying to regain that knowledge in that spiritual way, I think is so important, because our knowledge is not lost. We just need to start making those relationships. We need to start connecting with our ancestors. We need to start connecting with the earth. And all of these conversations are going to be easier for us to communicate with each other. That's what I have to share today. Miigwech.
Good, Ashley. Yeah, absolutely. And as I said, when Tom talked a little earlier about the hair of the women and the little kids, I'm gonna try to pull that all in, because here's what I see that's happening and all of these connections where we are now. And it's pretty profound that, you know, because I was thinking about that last night and this morning about how I was going to lead to this, and then Tommy brought up the perfect prophecy story that is going to tie this all together. So thank you, Ashley. All right, then, so now we're going to move on to Cheyenne. Pleased to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well. Thank you for the invitation. And I apologize for the confusion on the time difference. I'm in Manitoba currently. I
Okay,
did prepare a presentation for today.
okay, so.
Would you be able to give me permission to share my screen from your tech support?
Yes, absolutely. Joel, are you there?
Yep, I'll see what I can do here.
If I could just start by introducing myself. My name is Cheyenne McKay. I'm a senior project manager with the Center for Indigenous Environmental Resources. I don't know if you may have heard of our organization. I have a little bit of introduction in my presentation, but I'm originally from Pine Creek First Nation in Manitoba. I'm a Ojibwe. My spirit name is Shooting Star. I am one of those generational residential school survivors that doesn't know my language, but I went through the colonial education system and achieved my Bachelor of Science in Conservation Biology. And SEER was my first full-time job, and I've worked at this job for 12 years. I'm also celebrating last month my 20-year sobriety from drugs and alcohol, as I choose to live a clean way of life. And also I attend ceremonies regularly, but it's not something I was raised with. I kind of didn't learn that path until I think it was after my parents decided to quit drinking alcohol, probably when I was around 13 years old. And we started going to more ceremonies. And that was when I went to my first sweat lodge ceremony. But still kind of a wayward person. I think I'm Windigo Khan, we call it backwards person, that I do things backwards. So like I went through the education system, and then I started questioning, well, who am I? And I started going to more ceremonies and being interested in sweat lodge ceremonies, shake tent ceremonies, sundance ceremonies. I'm a third year sundancer. I sundanced last year. And that to me is like an ultimate sacrifice. Our climate is changing, and we went through extreme drought situations, and I was watching the women that I started dancing with on day one just drop like flies because of the heat intensity. But I stayed faithful to the prayer and the reason that I was there and the sacrifice that I was willing to make for the people, mainly the people that were struggling with COVID and sicknesses, youth that were dying from addictions, and the mental health areas. Like I come from a family that's prone to a lot of, we've lost a lot of family members due to addictions, drugs and alcohol and overdoses. And it just seems like such a waste of life that we've come to be so lost in our identity that we search for it through these band-aids that make us feel good for a little while, but they just take everything from us and leave us with nothing. So I danced pretty hard, and just for good life and good healing. I'm just gonna share my presentation. It's still not allowing me to share screen, sorry. Oh, there, I see.
You should have the ability.
Yeah, got it.
Cool.
So I titled my presentation Braiding Knowledge for Climate Action and What Can Creation Stories Tell Us? And I was thinking about, like, from my own culture, being a Ojibwe, and I don't claim to know anything. I'm just a vessel here on earth doing creator's work, and I've not been trained or passed down knowledge from elders or knowledge holders growing up. I'm kind of just stumbling along and learning as I go. For my organization, for the last 12 years, I've been working with the Center for Indigenous and Environmental Resources. We're a first national Indigenous directed environmental nonprofit charitable organizations. I do see some familiar faces, so you may have heard of our organization before, or have seen me do some presentations previously. We celebrated our 25 years last year. We have a celebration report that's available on our website. We've worked with 500 environmentally focused projects with over 360 Indigenous nations during that time period. And we focus on protecting lands and waters and building sustainable communities. So we work with the communities to determine what their needs and priorities are, by just having a conversation and asking, what do you need? What would you like to see in your community? How can you better address climate change? And this kind of shows the breakdown on where we've worked over those years, by province and territory. But then thinking about it, like I was thinking about, how do I integrate Indigenous knowledge into the work I do with my scientific background and understanding? We really like to partner with First Nation, Métis, Inuit communities and organizations across Canada. And as I mentioned, determining what the needs and priorities are, because I really like to hear from the people themselves, like, this is what we really need to combat climate change, or this is what we really need in our community. And I will not move forward unless I hear that message. I really like to work with elders and knowledge holders for the best practices on project design, engagement, and sharing of information. I think I also agree with the previous presenters that it's really important to share information, and everywhere possible, CERE tries to share our documents online or share resources that we work with communities, that if they're willing to share their process and their successes with other people. And connecting the community with the science knowledge experts, because CERE doesn't have all the science knowledge background ourselves. If we don't have the technical capacity, we'll outsource it or help the communities try and find what they need. And we build capacity for science-based technical knowledge understanding as well. But at the same time, that relationship goes both ways, where the communities that participate, they gain the scientific knowledge, but anybody that's involved in the project is also gaining the Indigenous knowledge, because there's that sharing and braiding of knowledge that's happening. In terms of climate change, we have some resources that we like to share. We had a climate change adaptation toolkit for Indigenous communities developed in 2006. And this whole toolkit was redeveloped and updated for 2020. So it has a bunch of user tools, and it includes 4 key components: the Indigenous Climate Change Adaptation Guidance Document, Climate Change Adaptation Planning Guidebooks for Indigenous Communities, Indigenous Languages Glossary Workbook, and 2 Indigenous language glossaries that are already completed with Cree and Ojibwe as being the versions that we have available. The guidance document itself is developed focusing on loss of winter roads, wildfire, inland flooding, sea level rise, and coastal erosion. Mainly thinking that whatever process a community is in, whatever stage they are in terms of if they're just starting out and wondering why or what the main drivers are for climate change and how their community can adapt, and then find solutions for mitigation. These tools kind of let you jump in at different phases or where you need it. There's like a flow chart and a diagram, so you can use what you need and take the tools that work best for the community. So it has like links and to all different types of tools. Like for example, for inland flooding, you can do like floodplain analysis. You can and that can look at like how the water flows over your territory or over the community and how best to manage that and if things get worse. There's also 6 guidebooks that walk a community through a step-by-step process on developing a climate change adaptation tool. And it's outlined for wide application, looking at local adaptation. And it's also designed so that it's a living document that the community can work together and continue building on it for continued generations. The 6 guidebooks are starting the planning process, climate change impacts in the community, identifying community sustainability and climate change vulnerabilities, identifying solutions, taking adaptive action, monitoring progress and change. CERE currently has a couple projects in the works that are piloting these materials with Fox Lake Cree Nation in Manitoba and Sandy Bay Ojibwe First Nation in Manitoba. And the reason we focused with Manitoba is due to COVID, and it's more easier to access these communities within our own province. The Indigenous Language Glossary, as I mentioned, has the 2 glossaries available in Ojibwe and Cree, but also there's a template there that gives communities the resources that if they wanted to create their own glossary, I don't know if one exists for Haudenosaunee or for the Mohawk nations, But if there isn't, then this may be a resource that you may consider sharing and getting the conversation going. It's really amazing to gather with elders and knowledge holders. These guidebooks were developed, like for the Ojibwe one was with elders from Manitoba and Ontario, were traveled to Winnipeg. This was before the pandemic. And they spent a few days together and talked about what the key terms are and what the key messages are and what and how to translate that, but then also the back translation in the language, and then translating that to just like everyday English terms as a resource, and how to communicate climate change for communities. And we think about climate change, we need to focus on, like, for scientific understanding, and I apologize because I missed a portion of the meeting. If I don't know if you guys talked about the greenhouse gas effect, but we have the natural greenhouse effect that's been going on for like time immemorial. There was this natural fluctuation of CO2 gases, and that's like what we breathe out, like for carbon dioxide, but also the nitrous oxide was another compound, and the methane gas. And these were naturally found in the environment. So the sun is coming in, it heats up, and then it's being bounced back up and it's leaving the atmosphere so that the earth is not heating up so intensely. But what's happening now with the human impact is that we're seeing a lot more creation of more greenhouse gases. So it's creating a thicker layer. So the sun is able to penetrate to the earth, but because of those gases, it's creating you probably talked about it, like a mirror, but it is like reflecting back into the earth and warming up our planet way more intensively, and that's what's creating global warming. So when we think about a scientific understanding and why it's important for Indigenous communities to understand these scientific compounds is to understand where do they come from, like what's the breakdown. So this report's from 2019. They looked at the global standards for where things are coming from. So carbon dioxide was a huge percentage at 66%, methane gas and nitrous oxide. And these are things that are created by us as creating a demand for the production of products that are being created, and the industry and the pollutants are going up into the atmosphere. It's creating an overload of nitrous oxide, carbon dioxide, the vehicles that we choose to purchase and buy. Some people are cruising around with diesel trucks. That's adding to that layer as well. Methane gas, and it's the way that we throw away our garbage. Our garbage gets piled up, and then the longer that it stays piled up and it's not getting access to oxygen, there's a creation of methane gas that's going into our environment. So you see all these landfills everywhere, and a lot of them are at capacity. There's now like a federal mandate to close Indigenous reserves landfills because they're overfilled to capacity, and they're trying to get us to work with our neighbors to kind of spread out the responsibility and the load. But that's a whole other big discussion. Just understanding those basic components, I think, is good for people on how can we work together to reduce the creation of these greenhouse gas components. And I was thinking about, in terms of Indigenous knowledge, this is a little picture my son drew last night that I asked him to kind of sketch me up something. And talking about our creation story for Ojibwe, and I was just thinking about one that I learned when I was living in Pine Creek when growing up, and it was about the creation of Turtle Island and what this means to people. And it's the creator placed Anishinaabe people on Earth, and as mentioned before, I've heard from previous speakers that people weren't getting along. Creator was unhappy and decided he wanted to purify the earth and start over. So there was a great flood. And Nana Bush was the main character that we were raised with in the stories, and a few other animals. They were sitting on the turtle's back, and they're trying to figure out how to create the world again. And so each of the animals in turn were taking turns, and there was the loon, there was the beaver, and they could not succeed of diving down and getting the little bit of earth. But it was the muskrat who was very quiet and spoke up, very soft voice, that said, I'll try. And he swam down and everybody's laughing at him because like, oh yeah, if we can't do it, what makes you think you can? And they're ridiculing him. So and then he comes back up and he doesn't survive, but it clutched in his hand was a little bit of soil, and he put it on the turtle's back, and that created what we know today as North America, Turtle Island. And so this is a very important story for me because it represents a lot of things, especially taking us back to natural law. So I've taken this story and put it into context of our 7 sacred natural laws, and learning about the and how we understand what the turtle stands for truth. And I think we need to really be truthful on what's impacting climate change. We need to be, and our role within that, we need to understand our role and the truth behind what's causing climate change and what can we do about it. And the wolf represents humility. So in that story, I think about the little muskrat and how he believed that he could succeed when others didn't think he could. And so I think that individuals and even yourselves, like even one person can make a difference. Like they just need to believe in themselves. And for the beaver represents wisdom. That, as mentioned, I've heard it many times in this conversation already, that we need to listen to the teachings of our elders, and we need to prepare for the changing climate based on these stories. The Sabe, also known as the Bigfoot, he represents honesty. And we also have to put that on the polluters, that they need to be honest about how their activities, the oil and gas, the logging, burning of fossil fuels, are contributing to these greenhouse gases. And we need to understand how our choices drive that whole economic system for demand of product production and the amounts of methane, carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide that are in the environment. The buffalo represents respect. We need to respect the sacred relationship that we have to nature and our role as being protectors of the land, water, and air. You take in what you take out. So even when you're camping, you're out on the land, and whatever your garbage is or your waste is, like you take it out with you. You keep that land clean and pristine. Sustainable harvesting, you only take what you need. If you have too much, share, don't waste. Use every part of the animal or plant that you harvest. And I really like the previous example, because this summer when I was collecting sage for Sundance ceremony, that's what I did. Was I'd pick a little bit, I'd leave the root system, but I wouldn't like take the whole bunch of sage. I would just take a few and then move on to the next area, because it does need to grow, and there needs to be the plant available for other people. And to always be thankful and show gratitude when you take that animal or you take that plant to feed your families and yourself, to put tobacco down and say thank you. So I'm not sure if that's a common practice with other cultures, but growing up and being a Ojibwe, that's something that we always had to do. The bear represents courage. We need to have the courage to be the voice for the environment, because it can't speak for itself. It does, but are people listening? When you see like the overflooding and whole communities are being flooded out, are people listening to what happened there? And what is that telling us? What are the waters telling us? Like somebody needs to be the voice for the waters and for the land. If things aren't growing and it's a drought and it's barren, but there are ways to restore the environment. You can put the buffalo back onto the land and they'll restore the environment. You know, that example from Yellowstone National Park in the States, when they took the wolves out many years ago, but then they restored them to the land. And those wolves, in a matter of years, were able to restore the whole ecosystem, and they managed to like get the rivers flowing again, just based on their being there. So I really recommend people to watch that documentary, because it really shows the power of the respect and that we need to have for animals and their role in the environment. And the eagle represents love, because we need to have love for ourselves and one another. Like, I want to go back to the community raises the child. Even living in Brandon, we see a lot of that, where kids are just misbehaving and nobody's doing anything about it, and you're just watching. But I was raised that way, that the community raises the child. So I will step in with strangers' children and be like, watch your language. You know, like there's other smaller children around. You need to be a role model. And I have no problem doing that, because to me, that's how I was raised, and we can't continue to turn a blind eye or look away when people are being abused or mistreated. We need to speak up, and we need to share that knowledge again with the younger generations, because they're going to be the future leaders one day. Like your generation are the leaders of today. Like all of us here on this call are the leaders of today, and we have a responsibility to share what we're learning with others so that knowledge can continue to grow. And that's what I prepared for you guys today. I don't know if there's any questions on any of the materials. I'm happy to share the presentation as well. I could send it to Kevin in a PDF format.
Okay, so we'll get back to that then in a minute. I'm just going to, I guess, kind of summarize a lot of the discussion that we had, and then we'll open it up to questions. So I want to acknowledge each and every one of you for taking the time to be with us today to contribute some of your collective knowledge and wisdom. Because all of us, in our language, if I ask you, Oni darodo, what dara is clay. All of us are walking clay that is infused with the spirit that gives the spirit expression. So we know that we're all sacred. We know that we all have something to offer. And we're here now to try to look at everything what's happening, the climate emergency, all of the pollution, the disease, the sickness, all of this. And we're trying to say, all right, with all this collective knowledge, wisdom, and information, you know, even from the scientific data perspective, what is it that we got to start to do moving forward? So when Tommy talked about those two serpents, for sure we understand that it's not just Britain and the United States, but it's the monetary system. You know, because if we ask ourselves, why do we get an education? To get a job. Because we need the skills, knowledge, attitude for whatever. A job for what? To make money. Everybody has this idea that money supports me. You know, you look at Wall Street, you look at, you know, how that whole fabricated system is run. And everybody thinks, you know, I got money, I'm it, look at me. But you can't eat money. Money has nothing really. And of all the institutions and all of that, a lot of people look at it as money is the lifeblood. And if you look at it from its core, the way it's been devised, its core is corrupt. So that's why we get all of this corruption from the multinational corporations to government, and then even people, because then, you know, people will destroy other people for, you know, money and everything that the accumulated wealth. But anyway, we mentioned about the 215 kids, and the latest that I have, I think it's already over 6,000 kids that I say, and I put it this way, whose spirits have resurrected up from the dead. Now, why are these spirits resurrecting up from the dead? And like Ashley pointed out, you know, she started putting food out every once a month to acknowledge all of these ancestors of this land, going from time immemorial. We didn't cross no Bering Strait. We know that we're from this land. We've always been here. We've been given our ways of knowing, but this knowledge and information was always trying to be suppressed. But now we're in the time of the indigenous spiritual resurrection, and we're resurrecting up, and we're bringing this knowledge now to the forefront because now people are open to it. And like in our condolence ceremony, how we deal with grief, we all say that when we're all suffering, our eyes tear up, we don't really hear, there's a lump in our throat, there's a knot in our stomach. All right, all of us know, we better all start seeing different, we all better start hearing different, we all better start speaking different, and together we all better start doing different because time is of the essence. So now what happened to us? This idea, this curse, that's what I call it, a curse and a spell originated from the old country that came here in the form of fear. Because the religion that I was raised with as this Catholic in this community is all fear-based. So it was fear. Then from that fear, then came their monetary system and their forms of government. But now these kids are resurrecting up. And as they're resurrecting up, and as there's almost 6,000 of them on this Turtle Island in this hemisphere, is lifting up this veil, this cloud that all of us now are coming to begin to see. Now, when Tommy talks about the hair of the women, That's true. We all come out of the sacred vessel of our mothers. The women have to start to get together. The women get together, and then us, the men, we're that wood, that hickory wood that is strong yet flexible. We complete the bow. Now that that bow is done, and then we're going to take that arrow that is going to pierce the mindsets of the people that are coexisting here with us to understand what is it that we have to offer. And it can't be dismissed anymore. Because if you think you're going to dismiss us, well, you know what? Mother Earth is going to do it in her way. And as far as we are concerned, we know that it's happened where, humans will not be around. So we're at a precipice. We're at a time now, a fork in the road, where we have to bring our best collective knowledge thinking forward. And I'll just say, like, if you just look at what happened in the last little while, who's the woman of Department of Interior, United States? An Indigenous woman. Who is the leader of the Assembly of First Nations right across Canada? A woman. The Grand Council of Chiefs, who's leading that? A woman. The Grand Chief of Ganawagi, who's leading that? My daughter, a woman. Even though these are foreign colonial constructs that are here on Turtle Island, and we could say, well, we detest it for everything that it represents, but let's try to look and see what's happening. These so-called government positions, our women are in there. The Governor General of Canada, about 3 weeks ago, asked all of these women, my daughter included, to go to Ottawa, and they sat down and had their own little women's council to talk about where we are. And my daughter, she understands the language. She comes to ceremony, so she's this younger generation now that is open to these ideas. Anyway, so now here's what I say is these 215 and almost 6,000 kids now are what I believe is the little boy. And that mountain that he's going to bring us to is a spiritual consciousness where we're going to have to start to think different. And as we're going to begin to start different and have these conferences or these discussions like we're doing right now, we're going to start to come together. And then hopefully we can bring a united voice so that we could send that arrow, pure white, taking our spirituality, our languages, our creation stories, our ancestors, all these ways of knowing to penetrate the mindsets of the multinational king corporations that are making all of these decisions and saying, we got to get off of fossil fuels. We got to do it as quickly as possible. We got to understand that the earth is our mother, a living woman that has life, that has feelings, and we cannot continue with the status quo because we just can't. And the people that think that we're going to continue to do this, well, we're going to see the intensification of what's happening. I was just looking on the news last night. Again, in the Midwest, they got hit with more winds. Those ice caps are melting. We're never going to bring that back in our lifetime. Those ice caps are melting. What does that mean? That the oceans are going to begin to rise and there's flooding that is coming. The disease, they're talking about this new one now, this what is it called now? I don't know, this new microcron or whatever it's called. But this is just the beginning, because we have this idea that says that we can extract, we'll manufacture, we'll advertise, we'll buy, we'll use. Then what's next? We throw it away. Well, where's a way? There's no such thing as a way. All of these things, like Cheyenne just said, are bioaccumulating now. It's building up, and these things are coming back to roost because humans are the ones that created all of this stuff. And now that it's going to stare them right in the face, now we don't like it. Because there's a saying, it says, if you contaminate the bed that you sleep in, one day you'll die in your filth. And these things are starting to come now. So it's imperative that we bring our best minds together now and we start to talk. All right, so we heard from the teachings of this land, from our spirituality, from our indigenous wisdom. We heard from the scientific perspective. So now we'll just open up to questions about what anyone has to say. So if we could just use the reactions there, and you can raise your hand up, and I'll call you out and we'll have some discussion until 12:30. Who's got questions? All right, so I'll have one then for Glenn McPherson. Okay, so I've been following you for a number of years now. And, you know, a lot of the stuff that the periodicals and the information that you have is right up there. And we have to ask ourselves, you know, so based on some of the stuff that you know and what you've heard, has anything changed in your mind about moving forward?
Well, I only recently came across the work of Dr. Tao, who's with us here today. And until I came across his work, and specifically his ideas behind the mere reflection framework, I thought that there was no chance that we would persist through this mass extinction event. And as a result of coming across Dr. Tao's work, now I'm not so firmly convinced. I think if we can implement the mere reflection framework very rapidly, then we can stabilize initially the temperature of Earth and then start to bring the temperature down. So, as I've indicated earlier, I'm a huge fan of the set of ideas underlying the mere reflection framework. On the other hand, the implementation of the framework will require the support of governments and probably corporations in the world. It will require sacrifices on the part of all of us. And I'm not sure that many people are willing to make those sacrifices. So I have lived off grid for 10 years and opted out of the monetary system 12 and a half years ago, because I realized it was the monetary system that was driving us to extinction. But I don't know a lot of other people who are inclined to follow me in that direction. And given the adverse consequences that followed for me, I'm not sure I can recommend it at this point to a large number of people. So it seems that we're in something of a catch-22. I'm a huge fan of Dr. Tao's work, but I don't know how we're going to generate the support to get that idea implemented.
Okay, good, thank you. Okay, let's go to Pauline.
Thank you. This was incredible, and thanks everyone for sharing those incredible stories that seem to underscore the science, believe it or not. I think it's really remarkable. I was thinking about how in Ye's presentation, he talked about the altruism of the single-celled organisms when they were faced with this challenge, the survivability. And that really is interesting because that was how Darwin developed the idea of evolution, from observing altruism in nature. That seems to be our story as human beings as well. And we seem to forget that we evolved as altruistic, loving, and playful animals. The warlike, the rugged, self-individualist idea that is perpetuated in the modern day culture is not how we evolved, and that is what's killing us. So I just think it's so incredibly wonderful to see the mythology leaking into the science leaking into the mythology, and all of these things are pairing up beautifully. And maybe Rick was asking the question, how do we get people to see that? How do we create this altruistic movement in humans who have every day, it's all about, take care of yourself, take drugs, be happy, make a lot of money, get that new Porsche, get that new, oh, Elon Musk is going to move to Mars. Please go to Mars, please. You know, how do we do that? And maybe it is just using the science and the mythology and showing that it's not our rugged individualism. It's our love, our compassion, our empathy, our decency, our love of dance and music and art and playfulness. Like that's when we're the happiest,
Right.
is when we're playing and dancing. And so yes, Cheyenne, being the sun dancer, I love hearing that. I want to see more of that. And it's just, and Ashley sharing the stories with those young people who are grieving and trying to understand, what does this mean? And having your own dreams pull you into what's actually, this thing that's really has been a secret for who knows how many centuries. I think it's wonderful. Thank you. This has been incredible.
Thank you. Okay, Yay Tao.
Yeah, thanks everyone for sharing. That was a very powerful seminar. And I completely agree with the Rick that, whatever we're doing at Mirror Reflection, it's nothing but just a very simple tool to help doing the real work, which is societal transformation and really returning to values that have proven to work over millennia, rather than the recent anomaly that's called capitalism. And I was very much struck by Tom's story about the snake. So what hit me was, these snakes initially are helpless. They are beautiful, and they were completely under control of people. But then eventually they take on a life of their own. They gain independence and they're out of control. And that's essentially what has happened to capitalism in the West. And our compatriots who are descended from European ancestry, I think the majority of people in the US and Canada are also taken hostage by the system. So in essence, there's no like we versus them. It's basically humans versus a system which has no basis in anything. So in that sense, I see hope. But I also cautious about the actual feasibility of what we develop as technologies because of the intrinsic inertia in the system that's so tenacious and strong and really difficult to curb. So I think what would happen would be similar to what happened in those cell experiments where you have some random mutations which are initially the minority. For example, like people in this room and watching this video were absolutely the minority. But if we're able to demonstrate, a successful adaptation to the incoming disaster, then perhaps, just through the ability of humans to copy paste and to learn from each other, we might be able to grow like bottom up adaptation strategies and communities to a larger scale. Because the mainstream system is coming to an end. There's no way for industrial agriculture to persist beyond the next couple of decades if we're really, really, really lucky. So traditional ways of living close to land, will inevitably become an absolute necessity if we were to persist. So in a sense, I regard climate change as a great equalizer. Because Elon Musk could dream all he wants to create durable settlements elsewhere, but I think when you are deep in the trenches doing science, you realize how little we scientists know about nature. We really know nothing. I can tell you, and I have worked at top laboratories in the world at Harvard, ETH, MIT. We're very, very ignorant, and compared to indigenous wisdoms and traditional knowledge that has enabled humans to survive, for the past 100,000 years or so, like science is really at its embryonic stage. with regard to really being able to give a full account of nature and its functioning. We're starting to learn some things, but what we learn seems to be consistent, with values that are traditional, of this respect, of not taking more than you want. Make sure you replenish what you take. These are very simple principles that are just eternal and are very basic. So that's my contribution.
All right, wonderful. Go ahead, Rick.
Well, I got a thought as we was listening to everybody. They announced that they're going to, the federal government's going to provide $40 billion in compensation to the children who were put into the foster care system. And that maybe, Kevin, what we should try to do is to create a new, I don't know what you want to call it, the White Stone Mirror Company, to have them invest. Even if we could get 10% of that $40 billion, that would give us $4 billion to begin to do this mirrored system within our communities, combined with ceremony and prayer. But I think that's a great idea to say to young people who have suffered from the system, here's your opportunity to ensure a more wholesome life for the future generations to come by reinvesting your money. Because otherwise, when you give oppressed people money, they buy unsustainable homes, they buy gas guzzling cars, and they eat artery clogging steak. So it's going to be, the money is just going to dissipate, but it might be something worthwhile. I think the indigenous people have to put their money where their mouth is as well. We have to begin to finance this new, let's just call it, I don't know what you want to call it, Indio science, this new thing that is going to bring together these thoughts to demonstrate that we have to have a practical applicable, we have to have practical ways in which Indigenous knowledge begins to have direct impact on climate change. And I think that's, I like your project a lot because I think that's got something to do with working really in relationship to the sun.
Right.
All we're doing is giving our elder brother some of his energy back to say, here, we now understand what you said. We're looking skyward. We're going to send that back. So I think it's a great mutual project that we should begin to tout.
Yeah, that's an excellent idea, Rick. Okay, Yetao.
Yes, thanks for the suggestion about giving opportunity to the young generation of indigenous people. And MIR, we're very devoted to also educating people and also learning from them. And most of our technical staff are range from college kids to master's, PhD students, and a couple of high school students even. So we're always on the lookout for opportunity to share the knowledge. And starting this coming spring and summer, we'll be implementing field experiments in New Hampshire, very close to where Guy and Pauline will be. And if there's young people interested in learning about science and also apply their knowledge about the nature and agriculture to real potential transformative experiments, then we're very happy to welcome them and also to provide mentorship and also to learn from them.
Good, wonderful. When we talk about where we are, I'm gonna just share one thing that happened with me and my dad. So my dad died in August 17th of 2015. He had gotten a heart attack just before Christmas in December 2014. 4 months after his heart attack, I went to sleep at my parents' place. My dad got up earlier than me that morning and he said, I want to talk to you. He said, if anything happens to me again, I don't want no ceremony. I don't want to be resuscitated, no nothing. Because the day he got his heart attack, I called our sister community. One of the chiefs came, we brought the wampum, all of that, because we have ritual that we do for our own people. Anyways, the day that he's gonna die, I didn't know that. My mom called, she says, go to the hospital, your dad fell. Anyway, long story short, we go to the hospital. My last conversation with him was as we're waiting for the results from his blood work and all that. So what time is it? I said, 8 o'clock. He said, let's go home. I said, let's wait for the results. No, he says, come on, let's go. I want to go home. I said, Dad, let's just wait for the results. Anyway, that was my last conversation with him. About 20 after 12 or thereabouts. Oh no, 20 after 9. All of a sudden I look at him and he's going into cardiac arrest. So the doctor was going to give him the defibrillator. I said, nope. I said, let him go. Doctor didn't like that. He gave me a look that said, hey, I saved life. I said, let him go. Anyways, I grabbed my father's hand and I spoke to him until the doctor pronounced him deceased at 9:29. Anyways, I held with his body to be with him for that little bit. I went back to my house. We all went back to the house after my dad's body got cold about 2 o'clock that afternoon. A lot of people were coming in the kitchen. Anyway, it was getting too hot. I said, I'm going to go sit on the front porch. I want to go sit on the front porch. And my partner came up to me. She says, hey, what kind of bird is that on the line? I look up, it's a mourning dove. Now, this is a common theme. I said, mourning dove. Said, how come there's only one? Well, that's a sign. I said, my mom's going to be alone now. It reminded me of another story. In May of 1999, my dad came to visit me. And as he's coming up, a little fledgling robin lands on my clothesline, this close. And I said, Dad, I said, you see this little baby robin? I said, this baby is a messenger. So watch this, we're going to get a message. We start drinking our coffee, and lo and behold, Tom Porter calls. Tom Porter says, Kevin, I'm up in Wisconsin. He says, I can't make it. He says, but a good friend of ours, I just got a call that his 3-year-old daughter died. He says, can you drive to near Albany and go help to bury the little girl? I said, sure, give me the address. So second story bird on the line. Anyways, I started to think now. I had some time about the good, the bad, my dad, our relationship and all of that. And then I started to feel guilty. Because I was thinking to myself, I said, if I didn't tell that doctor, let my dad die, he'd still be alive. I don't know what condition, but he'd still be alive. Then the tears started to flow. I had that lump in my throat. I had a knot in my stomach. So I closed my eyes. I said, Dad, between me and you, father and son, we know there's no such thing as death. You're in the ancestral spirit realm now. I says, you can traverse the spiritual to the physical just like that. I said, if I open my eyes and you can give me a sign, I said, that'll be great. I said, if I open my eyes and there's nothing there, well, the typical life expectancy of a Canadian with our diets and all of that is 77. Not to say that I'm a Canadian, but it's 77. I said, all right, I'm 57. So in 20 years, when I'm 77, I'm going to join you in the Sky World Council. So I said, imagine if I open my eyes and my dad gives me a sign. So anyways, I'm going to show you this. So it comes in the form of the clouds. My dad's name is Fred. Our last name is Deer. And this whole thing started because she said, you know, what kind of bird is that on the line? So I'll just share this one quick thing. So if you look in the picture, when I open my eyes, so right here is a letter F. My dad's name is Freddie. Right here is the bird. You can see the head, the neck, and the body. And right here in the wing is the letter D. And I thought to myself, wow, that's pretty fantastic. I said, when I tell this story, some people will say, you know, that's just a coincidence, doesn't have any relevance. But to me, we always talk about as Indigenous people that the earth, our mother, our grandfather, the thunder beings, our elder brother, sun, grandma moon, mother earth, the 3 sisters, corn, beans, and squash. We talk about relationship, we talk about family. We're still connected. And we get these signs from time to time. That's the great mystery. That's the great spirit. It's not in a person or a thing. It's all of this sacred life, this heartbeat, this vibration that we are all connected and we're all breathing right now. Our lungs are expanding and contracting, our heart muscle. Stand at the edge of a lake and watch that water always coming and going like this. And that's that sacred vibration that we're all a part of. So what do we have to fear? Nothing ever. Because this little experience of 100 years of life, if we have, compared to eternity, is nothing. But what do people do? They kill, they war, they destroy. Why? When you fully get it, you don't need all of that stuff because you just know. You're part of this sacred energy and you're going back to it. Anyway, I just wanted to share that little spiritual food for some of you. Any other questions, comments? What are some of the recommendations that we need to do then moving forward? I know we're going to talk about what you just offered, Rick, about seeing that, well, maybe this money that the federal government is going to give, for all of these people that went through those residential schools, and maybe see if we can, put them in touch with some of the ideas that were talked with Mir. And then you just talked about, well, maybe too, there's something that could happen with the university, trying to partner up with getting some of the youth involved with some of this stuff. Those are great recommendations, and for sure we'll see how we could explore that, because I don't think we're just going to stop and this is going to end. I want to keep in touch with Guy and yourself, and some of the other people that are on this that I've just met today for the first time, like Cheyenne, and yourself, Pauline. So yeah, because it's crucial. So we have to, look at what we could do from our indigenous wisdom, from the scientific community, and say, okay, let's try to move this forward and get as many people as we could to understand what it is. Anyone else like to share any final thoughts? Tom, what do you think? What do you think we should do moving forward?
Well, I think just to do some more of the same, what you've just been doing, and getting some thoughts of the other people who have been deprived of these kinds of knowledges,
Right.
and get their input as to, because that's the one we have to move, is their mind. So maybe if we hear from them, who they think do that.
I'd be more than happy to share with our social networking team and to share this feed to other communities and other people across Canada, so we can even just start listening to the stories and understanding the connections that we're sharing today.
Beautiful.
I know, Kevin, one thing that there was a man across the river. He's retired now, but he worked for the federal government, and he grew up in South Dakota. He retired about 4 years ago, and he worked with the Farm Bureau, and he used to help us here because there's government money if you don't plant corn or this and that, federal programs, and so he would always make sure we're whatever there was. Anyway, I gave him a book and Grandma said book,
Oh yeah.
and as a gift because I knew he was retiring. And then later on, when I went there before he retired, he was so grateful for that gift, and he said, I changed my whole opinion because I grew up in South Dakota, and I was always envious that the federal paid tuition for the Indians to go to school and to college and this and that. And also there was programs for Indians not given to the white people. And he says, and I always thought the Indians were lazy people and they were ungrateful people and this and that. He went on. That's what I was, and he says, that's what most non-natives in South Dakota were led to believe and think. He says, but after reading Grandma said book, I understand now why kind of negativity in the native country, because they were robbed of their soul and their spirit, their history and their language and everything. He said, I didn't know it was that bad. He says, but now he says, when I go back to South Dakota, I have a lot of apologies to do. So this is all in that same kind of a process that we need to do in the next levels, in a higher, wherever it can be done.
Right. All right, thank you. Ashley, as I think you're probably one of the youngest one on our call, looking at the youth perspectives. What do you see moving forward?
I think it comes down to basics, getting back to ceremony, building relationship with each other, learning how to communicate with each other, because, it's been generations of us having this inability to communicate with each other, this generations of competition, competing against each other. So we really need to start humbling ourselves and creating that understanding, grounding ourselves in ceremony, grounding ourselves in the work that we're doing, to help that communication happen, so that we're able to understand each other. And I think that this is a great step by having these spaces. But being out on the land with each other, experiencing ceremony and spiritual understanding together, so that we know how to guide this work forward, we know how to move forward, and we can all be content with how we move forward. No one's left wondering what is happening. Our intentions need to be clear on the work that we're doing as well, because there has been a lot of mistrust. There has been a lot of hidden agendas. So the relationship building and the ceremony and the intent is so important and crucial, I think, to the work that we're looking to do.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that comes to mind is, as you know, a lot of us didn't grow up with all of this stuff. So when I was first introduced to the Medewan Lodge and the Vision Quest and the fast, I heard about Joseph Campbell talking about the hero journey, departure, fulfillment, and return. You look at Black Elk. Black Elk came to the hub of the universe. He thought the hub of the universe was in Harney Peak, South Dakota. But when he got to that place where movement and stillness become one, he understood that that sacred hub was within his sacred center. Then he understood that it wasn't only there, but it resides in all people. Anyway, so some of us that have done this work, we begin to understand that. So I remember in this foreign language, this English language, we say Mother Earth. And even though I became a faith keeper and I can sing the Creator's Dance and all our sacred songs and all of that, but that idea of Mother Earth was still like inanimate. Like you say it, I mean, it's a thing, it's there, but it doesn't really have this life. Like, I mean, you say it, but anyway, listen to this real quick story. So anyways, I was at a language conference. One of the guys from the Medewan Lodge was speaking, and he talked about the Vision Quest. When you make that lodge, you got your circle. When you're put in there, everything about you is there, past, present, and future. And at that time, I was a Mohawk man that wouldn't cry. I said, babies cry, wimps cry, but a real man, you don't cry. Anyway, so the thing is, when you build your lodge, there's one sapling that represents your life. You come out of the earth, you're returning to the earth, just like that ark. But it says in your earliest recollection as a child, what happened there? Were you loved? Were you nurtured? Were you made to feel good? Or was there a lot of, slapping and I'll take the belt off and I'll whip you or get in your room and all of these different kinds of stuff? Or maybe there was violence, there was sexual abuse, whatever there was, but you go and you deal with that. And who you're going to give it up to is your first mother. Who's your first mother? It's not your biological mother, it's your Mother Earth. So I was thinking to myself, I said, heck, how could the Mother Earth heal me when my mom is still alive? Even today, I could go up to her and say, Mom, I need a hug, I need a kiss, I need whatever. Anyway, in that time, put my tobacco down, did all my prayers and all of that. And I can't explain how this ends up happening, but I hear like someone or just a strong thought that says, okay, you see this soil? This soil is an extension of my body. So lay down and cover your body with it. So I lay down, took off almost all my clothes, and I covered myself with that soil. And I had an epiphany, because I said, holy heck, imagine, because what had happened, it was like these arms came out of the earth and hugged me and nurtured me and, was giving me this love. And I says, wow, I said, if I could choose the moment of my death, I would want to die right now, because I said, if I didn't do this, in the future, I would die, go in a pine box wrapped in buckskins or what have you, go back into the womb of the Earth Mother, but I'm dead. Anyways, I was feeling all elated about this. All of a sudden, self-doubt comes in the picture and said, this is not true. You just made it up. And it was just like my balloon just got bursted of happiness. So I took my sacred tobacco, I put it down again. I said, Mom, Ista. I said, Ista, wana ti oya jokna sajade. Tiniti ganutunyu ne zanga satstane. I said in my language, Mom, I said, you got to help me that this thing that I'm going to do is going to solidify in my mind that this is real. After I did that, wait a little while, and all of a sudden, all right, get up and count your footsteps. So I stand up, wipe the soil off, and thinking to myself, what could the footsteps signify anyway? So I follow that cedar circle ring. I start counting my footsteps heel to toe. And when I got to where I started, there was a number. And when I blurted that number, I got down on my all fours and I kissed my mother. I says, Mom, Mother Earth, I says, from this day forward, I don't care when I tell this story, but I'm having an intimate relationship with you, because that number was 36 and I was 36 years old. So now I'm being elated and I'm thinking, now it says, go back and all of that pain and that hurt that happened in your early life, go and deal with it. So I'm sitting down and I'm starting to think now about all the sadness and all of that. And as I started to finally cry, I noticed that, because I didn't have my shirt on, that there was water that was dripping on my shoulder. And I looked up and it's a nice sunny day and all of that. I says, what the heck? Where is that coming from? And as I looked, you wouldn't believe, but when I had made my lodge, I inadvertently had cut a vine leaf. And when we go vision, quest, and fast, we always do it in early spring. We do it with the full moon. So what happened when I cut that vine leaf, and in May, as you know, the maple trees and all of that are pulling up the power of the earth. They're bringing up that sap into the... So what happened was it was dripping on me. And to me, that was a revelation from Mother Earth that she was crying with me. That she was saying, okay, my son, it's okay, cry. I'm crying with you. And when I came back from that vision quest and that fast, my thinking was transformed. If anybody asked me today, what was the greatest experience of your life? I always say when I went vision quest and fasted, give up food, give up water, give up your children, give up everything. Give up all your gadgets and go sit on the bosom of your earth mother. And even that little small ant that comes walking into your sacred space, you say to that ant brother, hey brother, how could you help me, pitiful me? Because as human beings, look what we do. We destroy, we kill, we steal, we lie, we do all of this stuff. But you still follow natural law. So help me, brother. And when I came around from that, I still talk about it today, about the transformation that happened for me. So now when I talk about Mother Earth, it's not just a flowery word. I've had an actual intimate, loving relationship that had feeling, that we cried together, that I was given these connections that I say to myself, wow, imagine if everybody understood that we could transform the world, because it's not just something that you have dominion over, that this is truly a mother with feelings that gives us life, that we're at her bosom. She's giving us this nourishment every day. And all that's required that we sing our songs. Hamba hibaya, hamba hasha. We dance to creation. Wow, so simple, so beautiful.
Mancha set.
So I guess that will conclude then. Any final comment, Rick? I don't know, Rick stepped away for a minute, but
No, not after that. I mean, I think what you're talking about is exactly why we used to have these rites of passage where everybody goes through that, everybody reconnects, everybody regains their identity. And we lost that after residential schools. And so we got to help this next generation recover that, because when you think about it, I forgot who, somebody mentioned it, everything that we need to know is already within our DNA, everything. And now we got to do is remove those layers of colonization, of self-doubt, of fear, and tap into, if you think about it, what you're really talking about, it's not just the original law, it's the original energy that produced life. Maybe that's the thing that we need to do. I appreciate when we say that scientists have a difficult time or maybe not understanding life very well. There was an exhibit in the Denver Art Museum about 20 years ago that raised that point. what have we learned about the earth? What have we learned about the sacredness of life? And raise all these questions, which are eternal questions that all religions, I think, have to wrestle with. So we got to get back, though, to that elemental thing is if it's not real, if you don't experience that real thing, the ceremony just becomes a ritual. Just, you know, you just say the stuff and you go back to your life. What we're talking about is transforming people's thinking and their behaviors to come in alignment with what the earth, I don't want to say expects of us, but the intention of creation.
Right.
And we've also been given a mind to be creative about that. So something like this mirror thing is a very ingenious way in which we can have that old knowledge born again in a new way. So I think that's what I appreciate from today's experience. I thank everybody for coming and participating and sharing things. And I hope that maybe we all go back and think about this for a while. And Kevin, you can gather us again and we'll have some deeper reflections about what we think about we can do next.
Yes, absolutely. And then we'll expand it to other people that we feel should be part of this this dialogue. Absolutely. So it was a pleasure to meet all of you. I know Yitao, you said you have to step out, so it was great. Keep up that reflection, because you know, even in our teachings, right? What happened with what's his name, Tegari Hogo, when he sees that reflection, you know, and it all had to do with transformational change. So yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I'll keep us all linked up, and we'll see where we'll go from here and get more people to be part of this dialogue, because time is of the essence. We know that you know, we have to look at what we do, our lifestyles, how we could change things, but we have to get everybody to understand that, you know, we're only here for a short period of time. As I said, that little story that I asked from my dad from the spirit realm, Dad, give me a sign to show that there's no such thing as death. I open my eyes, boom, there it is. I go to the Mother Earth, there it is. So, you know, all we have to do is just understand that stuff, change the way we're moving, and hopefully everybody will understand that, look, let's show love, let's show unity, let's be grateful, let's be mindful of those future generations, and let's make the changes that need to be. So with that, I thank each and every one of you, and I look forward to our next discussion. Ho, 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 nagiwa, he, ho, nagiwa, he, ho, nagiwa, he, ho, nagiwa, he, ho, 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 nagiwa, he, ho, nagiwa, he, ho, nagiwa, he. Oh, ho. All right, great. Okay.